Hey guys, tonight we are heading back to a time and a place that lies so vividly in our collective imagination, a place of dusty trails, wide open skies, and squinting heroes. We're going to the American Wild West. Now, the version we all know from the movies, with its noble gunslingers and epic cattle drives, is a beautiful fantasy. The reality, however, was a little less glamorous, a lot more gritty, and frankly, a place where you or probably wouldn't last the first day. The true story of the West wasn't written with bullets, but with disease, starvation, and sheer, soul-crushing boredom. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find other people like you who appreciate these quiet, historical journeys. And if you have a second, I'd love for you to leave a comment telling me what city you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from around the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on a crowded street somewhere in the East. The year is sometime after the Civil War, maybe in the 1872. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and damp city grit. Life here is predictable. It's a world of factory whistles, cramped tenements, and social ladders where the rungs are already occupied. You do your work, you collect your meager pay, and you try not to get sick. It's a life lived in shades of gray. But lately, there have been whispers of a different world, a world out west. This isn't just talk, it feels like a current in the air, a pull from the horizon. You see it on posters plastered over brick walls, advertising land so cheap it's practically free. You hear it in the saloons and boarding houses, tales from men who claim to know someone who knows someone who struck gold. The government itself is pushing this dream, a concept they call manifest destiny, as if it's your patriotic duty to go and tame that vast, empty wilderness. It's a powerful idea, suggesting that your personal ambition and the nation's grand destiny are one and the same. And then there are the books. This is where the dream truly takes root. Not in dry government reports, but in the colorful, cheaply printed dime novels you can buy for a few cents. They are filled with lore and illustrations of brave scouts, noble cowboys, and savage outlaws. The stories are wild, exaggerated, and utterly intoxicating. You read about men finding gold nuggets the size of a man's fist, of vast herds of bison that shake the very earth, of a land where a person can completely reinvent themselves, shedding their old life like a snake sheds its skin. These little books are the social media influencers of their day, selling a lifestyle that is almost entirely fictional, but feels incredibly real. They don't tell you about the dysentery or the loneliness. They only tell you about the glory. You hold one of these novels in your hands, the cheap paper rough against your fingers, and you start to believe. You imagine a life under a sky so vast it hurts to look at, a sky filled with more stars than you've ever seen. You imagine the clean, sharp air, the freedom from a boss's watchful eye, the simple dignity of owning your own piece of land. This is a point that historians still gently argue about today. What was the primary motivation for the hundreds of thousands who went west? Was it the pull of pure, unadulterated optimism and a belief in American executionism, or was it the desperate push of failure, debt, and the suffocating class structures of the East? For many, it was likely a cocktail of both. But for you, right now, it feels like pure hope. The dream solidifies. It's no longer a vague what if. It becomes a plan. You start selling off your few possessions. The worn-out chair, the extra set of clothes, the tools of a trade you now plan to abandon. Each item sold is a link to your old life being severed, and with each cut, you feel a little lighter, a little more untethered. You gather your small savings, buy a train ticket that will take you as far west as the rails go, and pack a single sturdy bag. You say your goodbyes, which are quieter and more awkward than you imagined. Your friends and family look at you with a mixture of envy and pity. They see the wildness in your eyes, the same look they've seen in others who left and were never heard from again. But their doubt only hardens your resolve. Now, you are finally on your way. You are sitting on a horrid wooden bench in a crowded train car, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a constant drumbeat marking your passage into a new life. Outside the grimy window, the familiar gray cities give way to green farmland, and then the farmland gives way to something else, intimidating emptiness. You are heading toward the sunset, toward the promise, toward the west. The dream is still intact, shining, and utterly untested, and as you lean your head against the glass, the gentle rocking of the train begins to lull you into a state of calm anticipation. The real journey has not yet begun. The train hisses to a stop, a great sigh of steam and metal. This is it, the end of the line. You grab your single bag, your knuckles white with a mixture of excitement and nerves, and you step down from the car. And then you stop. You freeze, because the place you stepped into is nothing like the pictures in your head. The dream you held so carefully for all those miles shatters on the ground, and the pieces are instantly swallowed by mud. There is no town square. There is no charming main street with a white steepled church. There is only a wide, churned-up river of dirt that serves as a road, punctuated by deep, stagnant puddles of muddy water. On either side of this morass, and about a dozen buildings, if you can call them that. They are raw, unpainted wooden boxes, hastily thrown together with crooked nails and mismatched planks. They look less like permanent structures and more like crates that were dropped here by accident and then forgotten. The whole place has an air of being aggressively temporary, as if it expects to be blown away by the next strong wind or abandoned tomorrow. You take a tentative step forward, and your polished city shoes sink into something soft and yielding. You look down. It's a slurry of mud, water, and fresh manure. The smell, which you hadn't fully registered, hits you with physical force. It's a complex, layered aroma that your city nose is entirely unprepared for. There's the earthy, almost sour smell of the mud, the sharp ammonia tang of horse and mule droppings, the scent of unwashed human bodies, the faint, sweet smell of rotting wood, and a greasy undercurrent from what you can only guess is a nearby slaughtering pen. It's the smell of a place where life is raw and biology is inescapable. The people are just as jarring. The men you see aren't the clean-shaven, square-jawed heroes of the dime novels. They are gaunt, sun-blasted figures with wary eyes. Their beards are matted with dust, their clothes are patched and stained, and they walk with a kind of weary purpose, their gazes fixed on the ground or scanning the horizon. There are no friendly nods or welcoming smiles. Everyone seems to be wrapped up in their own private struggle, their faces etched with the harsh realities of this land. You see a family huddling near a wagon, their faces pale with exhaustion, the children staring with wide, vacant eyes. This isn't the land of opportunity, it looks more like a refugee camp. You start to walk down what constitutes the main street, trying to keep to the precarious wooden planks that serve as a sidewalk. These planks are warped and uneven, with wide gaps in between that threaten to swallow your foot. You pass a general store, its windows so caked with grime you can't see inside. Next to it is a blacksmith shop, from which comes the rhythmic, deafening clang of a hammer on an anvil, a sound that seems to be the town's only heartbeat. You notice something peculiar about the buildings. Many of them have tall, flat, rectangular fronts that rise a full story higher than the actual building behind them. It's a cheap, theatrical trick, a facade designed to make a one-story shack look like a grand, two-story establishment from a distance. Historians call these false fronts, and they are a perfect metaphor for the West itself, a thin veneer of ambition plastered onto a much humbler, cruder reality, almost comical detail that somehow makes the whole scene feel even more pathetic. This isn't a town, it's a stage set for a play about a town, and the actors are all exhausted and desperate. A group of cowboys rides past, and you instinctively flinch. They aren't the singing heroes of your imagination. They are loud, rough, and caked in a layer of dust, so thick they seem to be made of the earth itself. They whoop and holler, their voices raw, and one of them spits a thick stream of tobacco juice that lands alarmingly close to your shoes. You realize the dime novel's got one thing right: this place is lawless. But it isn't the thrilling, romantic lawlessness of noble outlaws. Unpredictable lawlessness that comes from a vacuum of authority, where the loudest, most aggressive person makes the rules. There's a great debate among historians about the true nature of these cowtowns. Were they the violent hellholes of legend, where a man was safe to walk the street, or was the violence overblown by those same dime novels you used to love? The truth, as it often is, seems to lie somewhere in the middle. While shootouts at high noon were exceptionally rare, the homicide rates in many of these towns were shockingly high compared to eastern cities. The violence wasn't dramatic. It was sordid and usually fueled by cheap whiskey and simmering resentments. It was less about honor and more about desperation. You stand there, a small, clean figure in a world of dirt and grime, your single bag feeling impossibly heavy in your hand. The grand dream of wide open spaces and heroic freedom has been replaced by the claustrophobic reality of this dirty, desperate little settlement. The vast sky you dreamed of is still there, but from down here, trapped between the muddy street and the false-fronted buildings, it just makes you feel smaller and more insignificant than ever. Your journey west is over. Your struggle for survival has just begun, and the first order of business is simply to find a way to get out of the mud. You try to take a deep breath, an instinctual attempt to calm your nerves, but it's a mistake. The air doesn't just enter your lungs, it feels like it coats them. It's thick, almost soupy, and you can practically taste the dust and grime on the back of your tongue. You lower your head and try to breathe shallowly through your mouth, but the atmosphere of this place is inescapable. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. This isn't just an unpleasant background detail, you realize it's a defining feature of your new life. Let's break down this complex perfume of the Old West, shall we? The base note, the foundation of it all, is the smell of livestock. This isn't the pleasant, hay-scented aroma of a well-kept farm. This is the industrial scale stench of hundreds, sometimes thousands of animals. Horses, mules, and oxen are the engines of this world, and they are everywhere. Their waste is a constant, steaming offering to the muddy streets. The sharp, acrid tang of ammonia from urine catches in your throat, a scent so pervasive that after a while, you'll stop noticing it's there, which is perhaps even more disturbing. Layered on top of that is the smell of industry, such as it is. From the blacksmith's shop comes the hot, metallic smell of cooling iron and the sulphurous bite of burning coal. If the town is unlucky enough to have a tannery, you'll be introduced to a whole new level of olfactory horror. Tanning leather involves scraping flesh and fat from hides and soaking them in vats of chemicals, often including urine or dog dung, which were known to soften the leather. The resulting stench of chemical decay is something that can make even the strongest stomach turn. It's a smell that sticks to the back of your sinuses and lingers for hours. And then there's the human element. You look around and see no evidence of modern sanitation. No sewers, no drainage ditches, no plumbing of any kind. This leads you to a grim but necessary question: where does it all go? The answer is simple: everywhere. People use chamber pots in their rooms, and in the morning, the contents are often unceremoniously tossed into the street or a back alley. The few outhouses, or privies, that exist are little more than deep pits with a shed built over them. They are rarely cleaned, seldom moved, and in the heat of the summer sun, they become potent monuments to human digestion, their presence announced from 50 yards away. The back alleys of this town are not quaint little laneways, they are open-air toilets. This brings us to a major historical point. People of this era didn't understand the world the way we do. Germ theory, the idea that invisible microbes cause disease, was still a new and debated concept, not widely accepted by the general public. Instead, The prevailing scientific wisdom was the miasma theory. People genuinely believed that diseases like cholera and malaria were caused by miasma, or bad air. They thought that foul smells were not just a symptom of sickness, but the cause itself. As you stand there breathing in this toxic soup, you'd be gripped by a very real, scientifically backed for the time fear that the very air you are breathing is trying to poison you. Historians and archaeologists still uncover fascinating and slightly sad attempts to combat this. They find remnants of small, personal diffusers, little metal balls called pomme de reste that wealthy individuals would fragrant herbs like clove or lavender and hold to their noses in a futile attempt to ward off the stench. It was like trying to fight a house fire with a teacup of water. A more common, and equally ineffective, method was simply to chew tobacco constantly, the strong taste and smell overpowering everything else, or at least that was the hope. You watch a woman emerge from the general store, a delicate-looking handkerchief held tightly over her nose and mouth. It's a gesture of pure, hopeless defiance. She's trying to filter the world, but it's an impossible task. The dust itself, a fine powder of dried earth, dried manure, and countless other microscopic particles, is a constant presence. It's kicked up by every horse, every wagon, every gust of wind. Your water, your lungs. A persistent cough, known as the prairie cough, was a common ailment, a direct result of a life spent breathing in the landscape. There's a debate among social historians how much did this constant, unpleasant sensory overload contribute to the famous irritability and violence of the frontier. Did living in a perpetual state of disgust, in an atmosphere that felt both physically and metaphorically unclean, wear down people's civility and shorten their tempers? It's impossible to prove. But as you stand there, feeling assaulted by the very air, you can imagine how this environment could grind away at a person's soul, leaving them raw and exposed. You came here for the wide open spaces, but the reality you've found is a claustrophobic pocket of filth, where the air itself feels like a cage. You feel a desperate craving for a single breath of clean, fresh air. A craving so intense it's almost a physical pain. But looking around at the endless mud and the weary faces, you have a sinking feeling that such a simple luxury is nowhere to be found. The sun is beginning to dip below the flat horizon, painting the bottoms of the clouds in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of the sunset is a cruel joke, a magnificent backdrop for your increasingly grim situation. The air is getting colder, a sharp, biting cold that seeps through your thin city coat. The immediate, pressing need for shelter becomes your only thought. You can't just stand in the middle of this awful street all night. Your eyes scan the bleak row of buildings, looking for anything that resembles a hotel or a boarding house. You spot a sign, its letters faded and peeling, that reads Lodging. It hangs precariously from a two-story building that, unlike the others, doesn't have a false front. It looks marginally more stable, which you take as a good sign. With a sense of grim determination, you slosh your way across the street, your pristine shoes now completely sacrificed to the mud, then push open the door. You step into a small, dark room that serves as the lobby. The air inside is even more stifling than it was outside, thick with the smell of stale whiskey, old cigar smoke, and unwashed bodies. A grizzled man with a single eye and a magnificent, stained beard sits behind a rough wooden counter. He doesn't look up from the newspaper he's reading. You stand there for a moment, feeling awkward and out of place before clearing your throat. He finally raises his head, his one good eye fixing on you with a look of profound disinterest. "What do you want?" he grunts, his voice like gravel. "Thy room," you say, trying to sound more confident than you feel. "For the night." He lets out a short, humorless laugh. "Got money?" You nod, pulling a few coins from your pocket. He inspects them, bites one, then nods slowly. "Got two kinds of laudanum. The private room, that's $1. Or the common room, that's $0.25. A whole dollar seems like a fortune, but the thought of a common room fills you with a sense of dread. Still, you have to be frugal. What's the common room like, you ask? He gestures vaguely towards a door behind him. It's a room with a floor. You get a piece of it. He offers no further details, his expression making it clear he finds your questions tiresome. The price difference is too great to ignore. You sigh. The common room, then. He takes your quarter, sweeps it into a wooden drawer, and jerks his thumb towards the door. Help yourself. No snowing. You push open the door and are met with a scene of human misery that makes the lobby look like a palace. The room is long and narrow with no windows. The only light comes from a single, smoky kerosene lamp hanging from a rafter, casting long, dancing shadows. The floor is covered with about 15 men in various states of repose. Some are wrapped in thin, filthy blankets. Others are just lying on the bare, splintered floorboards, using their boots as a pillow. The air is a potent cocktail of sweat, cheap liquor, and despair. A chorus of snores, coughs, and murmurs fills the room. This is your accommodation. You find a small, unoccupied patch of floor near the wall, as far from the door as you can get. You set down your bag, using it as a backrest, and survey your temporary home. This, you realize, is the reality of cheap travel in the West. Private rooms were a luxury few could afford. For most travelers, laborers, and cowboys passing through, lodging meant renting floor space. A particularly grim but fascinating historical tidbit is the hot bed system some establishments use. In a town with a lot of shift work, like a mining camp, one bed might be rented by 2 or 3 different people. When one man's shift ended, he'd come in and wake up the current occupant, who would then head off to his own shift. The bed and the lice within it never had a chance to get cold. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you notice the details. You see a man muttering in his sleep, his hand twitching. Another is quietly sharpening a knife, his eyes dark and empty. There is no camaraderie here, no sense of shared experience. It's just a collection of isolated, exhausted individuals warehousing themselves for the night. You pull your coat tight around you, suddenly feeling very vulnerable. Your bag contains everything you own in the world. You wrap the strap around your wrist, a flimsy security measure that does little to soothe your nerves. Historians debate the level of crime within these transient spaces. While popular stories tell of men being robbed and murdered in their sleep, the reality was likely more mundane. Petty theft was rampant. A man might wake up to find his boots, his coat, or his last few coins gone, vanished with one of the shadows that slipped out before dawn. It wasn't dramatic violence. It was the quiet, opportunistic crime of desperation. You try to get comfortable on the hard floor, the wood digging into your back. You close your eyes, but sleep feels a million miles away. The symphony of bodily noise is impossible to ignore. A man near you has a deep, rattling cough that seems to shake the whole room. Every time the main door to the lobby opens, a slice of yellow light cuts through the darkness, accompanied by a blast of noise from the saloon next door. You think back to your small, quiet room in the east. You remember your own bed, your own space, the simple luxury of a closed door. You took it all for granted. Here, privacy is the ultimate commodity, more valuable than gold. You lie there on the floor, the stranger among strangers, feeling a profound sense of loneliness that is colder and harder than the wooden planks beneath you. You are just one more piece of human driftwood washed up on the shores of this new and forgiving world. Long night ahead of you. Sleep is impossible. The cacophony in the common room, the hardness of the floor, and the gnawing anxiety in your gut all conspire to keep you wide awake. After what feels like hours of staring into the oppressive darkness, you decide that facing the known dangers of the town is better than enduring the unknown horrors of this room. You quietly untangle yourself from your makeshift bed, clutching your bag, and slip out of the lodging house, back into the cold night air, the source of the noise that has been bleeding through the walls becomes immediately apparent. Next door, a pair of swinging half doors, known as batwing doors, feebly attempt to contain the chaos spilling out of the saloon. Light and sound pour from it like a wound. You hesitate for only a moment. It's the only place in this entire town that seems to have any life in it, and despite your better judgment, you're drawn to it. You push through the doors and step inside. The scene that greets you is one of managed chaos. The room is a haze of blue-gray smoke from cigars and pipes, so thick that it makes the lanterns hanging from the ceiling appear as fuzzy, distant stars. The floor is covered in a fresh layer of sawdust, a crude but effective method for soaking up spilled whiskey, tobacco spit, and the occasional splash of blood. You make your way to the long polished wooden bar, which seems to be the only clean surface in the entire establishment. Behind it, a bartender with a formidable mustache and a surprisingly clean white apron moves with an efficient, practiced grace. He's polishing a glass with a rag, his eyes constantly scanning the room, missing nothing. He is the conductor of this chaotic orchestra. The main instrument is the piano, tucked into a corner and being hammered on by a man in a bowler hat. HES not playing a cheerful tinitzatini, repetitive, and slightly melancholy melody that serves as the room's relentless soundtrack. This piano player is an interesting figure. Often, these musicians were professors, men with some formal training who had drifted west for one reason or another, and their presence added a thin, almost laughable veneer of culture to the raw environment. You order a whiskey, your voice barely audible over the din. The bartender slides a thick, heavy glass in front of you and pours a measure of amber liquid from an unlabeled bottle. You take a cautious sip. It's harsh and fiery, burning a trail all the way down to your stomach. This isn't aged, sophisticated liquor. This is rot-gut cheap high-proof alcohol, often distilled locally and sometimes adulterated with things like tobacco juice or even gunpowder to give it an extra kick. The quality of a town's whiskey was, in a strange way, a measure of its civility. Truly terrible whiskey meant you were in a truly lawless place. As you nurse your drink, you take in the cast of characters. There are cowboys, fresh off the trail, spending their meager wages as fast as they can. There are prospectors, their eyes still wild with the hope of a big strike, swapping exaggerated stories. There are stoic-looking farmers, in for supplies, having a quiet drink before the long ride home. And there are men who defy easy categorization, drifters, gamblers, and fugitives, all trying to lose themselves in the noise and the smoke. In a far corner, a group of men are huddled around a small table, playing cards. The game is poker, or more likely, faro, a faster, more popular game at the time. The tension around the table is palpable. One man, a professional gambler by the look of his fancy vest and steady hands, seems to be winning steadily. This is a crucial element of saloon life. The professional gambler was both a predator and a necessary part of the ecosystem. He was there to separate fools from their money, and many saloons depended on the revenue he generated. Historians often debate the prevalence of cheating. While many gamblers were skilled enough not to need to cheat, marked cards and hidden devices were common, and an accusation of cheating was one of the fastest ways to start a gunfight. You also notice the soiled doves, or saloon girls. They are not the glamorous, heart-of-gold heroines of the movies. They look exhausted, their painted smiles not quite reaching their weary eyes. They move through the crowd, laughing at jokes that aren't funny and fetching drinks, their primary job being to encourage the men to drink more and stay longer. Their presence adds a layer of sad, transcational intimacy to the proceedings. For a few cents, a lonely cowboy could buy a dance or a conversation, a fleeting moment of female companionship in a world dominated by men. This saloon is the town's central nervous system. It's a bank, where deals are struck and claims are traded. It's a post office where mail is left and picked up. It's a courthouse where impromptu trials are held. And most of all, it's a pressure valve, a place where the loneliness, boredom, and fear that define frontier life could be temporarily drowned in cheap whiskey and noise. But it's a dangerous valve. You can feel the undercurrent of potential violence in the air. A sideways glance, a spilled drink, an accusation at the card table, any of these could shatter the fragile peace. The saloon wasn't just a place for fun, it was a place where fortunes and lives were gambled away every single night. And as you stand there, nursing your awful whiskey, you feel less like a patron and more like a spectator at the edge of a simmering volcano. You finish the last of your burning whiskey, the warmth spreading through your chest offering a fleeting moment of comfort. The noise of the saloon is beginning to feel less like a threat and more like a thick, numbing blanket. You lean against the bar, watching the chaotic ballet of the room, and you feel a familiar dryness in your throat. It's not from the whiskey, it's a deeper, more persistent thirst that has been with you since you arrived. You need some water. You catch the bartender's eye and gesture for a glass. He nods, reaches under the bar, and pulls up a bucket filled with murky-looking water. A single, communal tin dipper rests inside it. He sloshes some of this water into your now empty whiskey glass and pushes it towards you. You stare at it. There are small, unit unfightable specks floating in the liquid. A thin film of grease sits on the surface. This is the house water, free for the taking. Your mind, still clinging to the civility of the East, rebels. You can't possibly drink this, but then you look around. You see a dusty cowboy drain his glass in one gulp. You see the piano player take a break to ladle a full dipper for himself. This is what people drink. This is what there is. Holding your breath, you raise the glass to your lips and take a small, hesitant sip. It tastes of dirt, metal, and something vaguely organic. You swallow, and it feels like you've just ingested a sample of the street outside. This simple, seemingly insignificant moment is, without exaggeration, the single most dangerous thing you have done since you arrived in the West. More than the threat of a drunken brawl, more than a rattlesnake or a stampede, this glass of water is your most likely ticket to an early grave. You, like everyone else in this room, are playing a game of biological Russian roulette. The core historical fact that Hollywood conveniently ignores is this: the number one killer in the American West was not the cold 45th, it was disease, specifically waterborne illnesses like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever. These diseases spread like wildfire through communities that had absolutely no concept of sanitation or water treatment. Let's follow the journey of the water in your glass. It probably came from the nearest river or creek, upstream from where the town gets its water. You would find ranchers watering their cattle, who are defecating directly into the water source. You would find people washing their filthy clothes, and even the runoff from the local cemetery could seep into the groundwater. The town's own waste, as you've already discovered, is thrown into back alleys and pits, and a good, hard rain will wash all of that filth right back into the very river from which the town draws its drinking water. It's a perfectly designed, closed-loop system for spreading disease. Cholera is a particularly terrifying example. It's a bacterial infection that causes severe, uncontrollable diarrhea and vomiting, leading to rapid dehydration. A healthy person could be dead within 24 hours of their first symptom. Outbreaks were swift and devastating, capable of wiping out a significant portion of a town's population in a matter of weeks. People would be gripped by panic, and those who were still healthy would often flee, inadvertently carrying the disease with them to the next settlement. Now, here's a fascinating and slightly disgusting tidbit of medical history. Doctors of the time had no cure for these diseases, but they had plenty of theories. For a patient suffering from the violent dehydration of cholera, a common prescription was a purgative. This was a substance, like mercury or castor oil, designed to make the patient well, purge even more. The thinking was that the body needed to expel the bad humors or the miasma causing the illness. They weren't reading extreme dehydration by inducing more extreme dehydration. It was a well-intentioned but lethally misguided form of medical care. Historians and epidemiologists still study the records of these frontier epidemics, and the numbers are staggering. In some wagon trains heading west, the death toll from cholera was higher than 10%. The Oregon Rail is famously lined with graves, but most of those graves don't belong to victims of accidents or attacks. They belong to the victims of a simple drink of contaminated water. There is an ongoing debate about the extent to which Native American populations, who had lived on this land for centuries, were affected by these same waterborne diseases before the mass arrival of settlers. While they certainly had their own health challenges, their lower population density and more nomadic lifestyles meant they were less likely to create the concentrated sources of contamination that plagued the new, permanent settlements of the pioneers. The civilization that the settlers brought with them also brought a level of disease that the wilderness had never known. You put the glass of water down on the bar, your thirst suddenly gone, replaced by a cold knot of fear in your stomach. You look at the men around you, laughing and drinking, and you see them in a new light. They are not just tough, they are lucky. Every day they roll the dice, and so far, their number hasn't come up. You just took your first roll. Now, all you can do is wait and hope that the invisible organisms swimming in that glass are feeling merciful tonight. You've survived the imagined dangers of the saloon, only to face the very real and silent threat lurking in a simple glass of water. A sudden crash from the other side of the saloon snaps you out of your water-induced paranoia. A chair has been knocked over, and two men are now on their feet, shouting at each other over a card table. The piano player, with a practiced instinct, stops playing mid-note. The low hum of conversation in the room dies instantly. Everyone turns to watch. This is the moment you've been dreading, the classic saloon confrontation you've only ever read about. One of the men is a huge, bear-like figure in a dirty sheepskin coat, a buffalo hunter by the looks of him. The other is a smaller, weary man with a gambler's vest and a nervous stick in his eye. The gambler is accusing the hunter of hiding a card up his sleeve. The hunter is responding with a string of insults about the gambler's ancestry. You instinctively look for the law. You scan the room for a man with a tin star pinned to his chest, the hero who is supposed to step in and calmly restore order. You see no one. The bartender is slowly, deliberately reaching for something under the bar, and it probably isn't a bottle. The other patrons are running for cover. They're just melting back towards the walls, giving the two angry men a wide berth. They're creating a stage. This is the grim reality of law enforcement in a frontier town. It was often a patchwork system, corrupt or entirely absent. The lawman of popular myth, the stoic, incorporate figure like Wyatt Earp or Wild Bill Hickok, was the exception, not the rule. Their legends grew so large precisely because they were little more than glorified bouncers, hired by the saloon owners and merchants to protect their property, not to dispense justice. The typical town marshal was often just the toughest man in town who was willing to take the job. The pay was low, the risks were high, and the authority was flimsy. His jurisdiction usually ended at the town limits. Beyond that, it was a matter for a county sheriff who might be based 100 miles away or a U.S. marshal who covered a territory the size of a small European country. Getting help could take days, if it ever came at all. This vacuum of official power led to the rise of what historians call informal justice. In some communities, citizens would form vigilance committees. This sounds noble, but in practice, they were often just organized lynch mobs. They would round up suspected horse thieves or murderers and dispense justice at the end of a rope, with no trial and no appeal. Their actions were a desperate attempt to create order, but they often devolved into an excuse for settling old scores or eliminating business rivals. Whether these committees were a necessary evil or simply a form of mob rule is a question that historians still hotly debate. Here's a particularly strange piece of frontier legal history, the soil de vimoni. In some jurisdictions, The testimony of a prostitute was not considered admissible in court. The legal theory was that a woman of immoral character could not be trusted to tell the truth. This meant that crimes committed against these women were crimes to which they were the only witness, often went completely unpunished. It was a legal system with glaring, built-in blind spots that left the most vulnerable members of society completely unprotected. Back in the saloon, the argument is escalating. The hunter takes a step forward, his hand hovering near the large knife on his belt. The gambler, pale with fear, takes a clumsy step back and fumbles to pull a small pistol from his coat pocket. It's a cheap, small-calibered Derringer, a weapon of last resort. Suddenly the bartender acts. He doesn't shout or draw a gun. He uses a heavy wooden club, a bung starter used for hammering bungs into barrels, onto the bar with a loud, definitive thud. "Take it outside," he says, his voice slow and flat. It's not a request. He doesn't care who is right or wrong. He doesn't care if they kill each other. He just doesn't want it happening in his saloon, where a stray bullet could break his expensive back bar mirror. His property is the only law that matters in this room. The two men stare at each other for another tense moment. The hunter seems to think better of it. With a final curse, he spits on the floor, turns, and storms out of the saloon. The gambler, shaking, quickly puts his pistol away and scurries back to the card table to gather his winnings. The show is over. The piano player tentatively starts up his tune again. The hum of conversation slowly returns. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. You just witnessed frontier justice in action. It wasn't a heroic duel. It was a sordid, pathetic argument between two men that was resolved not by a noble lawman, but by a bartender protecting his investment. There was no morality, no justice, just a crude and defective form of conflict management. You realize that in this world, safety and justice are not rights. They are commodities, available only to those who can afford to pay for them or are strong enough to enforce them personally. And you are neither. You are on your own. The tense atmosphere in the saloon slowly dissipates, replaced once again by the familiar drone of noise and smoke. The near-violent confrontation seems to have been forgotten by everyone except you. It lingers in your mind, a stark reminder of the fragile social fabric of this place. The gambler, having collected his money, gives you a wide berth as he heads for the door, eager to disappear before the buffalo hunter changes his mind. You watch him go, a small man swallowed by the dark street, and a thought begins to form in your mind. You can't survive here as a tourist. You need a purpose. You need a job. The next morning, you find yourself standing outside a makeshift corral on the edge of town. The air is filled with the sound of lowing cattle and the sharp shouts of men on horseback. A hand-painted sign nailed to a post reads, HANDSWUANTEDTRIELLEY. This is it. This is the heart of the cowboy mythos. The legendary cattle drive. The dime novels portrayed it as a grand adventure, a test of will and courage against the vast wilderness. You, in your naivete, decide this is your calling. You approach it all with a beaten man with a grim expression who appears to be in charge. This is O'Malley, the trail boss. He looks you up and down, his gaze taking in your clean hands, your unbroken posture, and your entirely unsuitable city clothes. His lip curls into something that might be a smile, or it might be a sneer. "Lookin' for work?" he asks, his voice dry as dust. You nod eagerly. "Yes, sir. I want to be a cowboy." He actually chuckles this time. It's not a friendly sound. "You ever worked cattle before? Son, ever even been on a horse for more than an hour's?" You admit that you haven't, but you assure him you're a fast learner and a hard worker. He continues to look at you with deep skepticism. This is the first dose of reality. The life of a cowboy wasn't an open-door profession for any young man with a dream. Trail bosses were businessmen managing a very valuable, very mobile asset. They needed experienced hands, not romantic greenhorns who were a liability, but they were also often desperate. Experienced cowboys were a migratory bunch, and a trail boss frequently had to fill out his crew with whomever he could find. O'Malley sighs, a long, weary sound. All right, I'll take you on, but you ain't a cowboy. You're a green pea. You'll be the wrangler's assistant, $10 a month in grub. Then you'll do exactly what you're told. You cause a stampede, I'll leave you in the dust. You understand, $10 a month. It's a pitiful wage, even by the standards of the time. This is a crucial historical point often lost in the romance. Being a cowboy was a low-status, low-paying, dead-end job. It was grueling, dangerous work performed by young men, often poor farm boys, ex-soldiers, or freed slaves who had few other options. The iconic image of the cowboy as a free-spirited hero was largely a later invention. In his own time, he was just a hired hand on horseback. You agree to the terms, feeling a small thrill of victory mixed with a large dose of apprehension. O'Malley points you towards the chuckwagon, the rolling kitchen that would be your home for the next 3 months. He tells you to see the cook, a notoriously cranky individual known only as Cookie, and get outfitted. Here's a curious piece of cowboy culture, the rigid hierarchy of the trail drive. The trail boss was the absolute commander. Below him were the experienced cowboys, the top hands. At the very bottom of the social ladder was the cookie, the trail cook, and his assistants. You, as the wrangler's assistant, are even lower than that. Your job will be to help the horse wrangler manage the remuda, the herd of spare horses that accompanied the drive. It's a job that involves more time on your feet chasing down stray horses than it does in the saddle. The cook, a grizzled old man with a permanent scowl, sizes you up and spits. Another one, he mutters. He shoves a tin plate, a tin cup, and a cheap frickin' spoon into your hands. This is your kit. He then points to a pile of bedrolls. Grab one. That's your house. There is no tent, no pillow, no mattress, just a roll of canvas and a couple of thin, coarse blankets. Historians who study the material culture of the West still marvel at the Spartan nature of a cowboy's possessions. Everything a man owned had to be carried on his horse or in the chuckwagon. This led to a life of extreme minimalism. A cowboy might own his saddle, his most prized and expensive possession, a change of clothes, a bedroll, maybe a knife and a pistol, and little else. There was no room for sentiment or comfort. As you stand there holding your pathetic little dining set, you watch the real cowboys. They move with an easy confidence, their bodies attuned to the rhythms of their work. They ignore you completely. You are an outsider, a novice, a liability until you prove otherwise. You are not part of the brotherhood. You are just the new guy, the butt of future jokes, the one who will get the worst horses and the most unpleasant tasks. The romantic dream of being a cowboy has vanished, replaced by the stark reality of being a hired hand at the absolute bottom of the food chain. The great adventure is still ahead, but it no longer feels like an adventure. It feels like a sentence. You roll up your new house, the rough canvas scratching your soft city hands, and try to find a place to stow it, trying to stay out of everyone's way, feeling more alone than ever. The first thing you are tasked with is getting properly outfitted. You can't go on a multi-month cattle doctor rest in city clothes. O'Malley points you toward the town's general store and tells you to get what you need, with the cost to be deducted from your future, meager wages. You are already in debt before you've even started working. You walk into the store, a place that smells of leather, coffee beans, and dry goods. The shelves are crammed from floor to ceiling with a bewildering array of items: barrels of flour, sacks of beans, bolts of cloth, tools, traps, and patent medicines promising to cure everything from baldness to melancholy. The store owner, a man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, gives you a knowing look. He's seen countless green peas like you come through his doors. He starts with your feet. Your city shoes are useless. He sells you a pair of cowboy boots, but they are not the fancy, decorated boots you see in movies. They are practical, unadorned work boots with a high, slanted Cuban heel. This design wasn't for fashion, it was purely functional, designed to keep a rider's foot from slipping through the stirrup. The pointed toe helped guide the foot into the stirrup quickly. They are stiff, uncomfortable, and you can already feel blisters forming. Next comes the leg wear. Your thin trousers would be shredded in a day. You are handed a pair of denim pants. This is one of history's great contributions from the era. A tailor named Jacob Davis and a fabric supplier named Levi Strauss had recently patented the idea of adding metal rivets to the stress points of men's work pants, creating a garment of incredible durability. You are buying a pair of what will one day be known as blue jeans. Right now, they are just scratchy and deeply uncomfortable work pants. Then comes the most iconic piece of gear, the hat. The store owner doesn't just hand you a hat, he asks you what kind of work you'll be doing. This is a fascinating historical detail. The cowboy hat was not a single, monolithic design. Its shape and style were highly regional and practical. The wide brim provided shade from the sun and protection from the rain. The high crown created a pocket of insulating air to keep your head cool. A man's hat crease could sometimes tell you where he was from. The Tom Mix crease was different from the Montana crease. You are given a simple, sturdy felt hat with a wide, flat brim. It's not a fashion statement, it's a tool. It's a sunshade, a rain shelter, a water bucket for your horse, and a pillow at night. He then sells you a pair of leather gloves to protect your hands from rope burns, a sturdy belt, and a bandana. The bandana, you learn, is one of the most versatile pieces of equipment a cowboy owns. It's a dust mask during a drive, a washcloth, a bandage, a pot holder for a hot coffee cup, and a tourniquet in an emergency. It's the Swiss Army knife of cowboy apparel. What you don't buy is a gun. This is perhaps the biggest myth of all. While many cowboys owned firearms, they were not a required part of the daily uniform. Guns were heavy, cumbersome, and expensive. On a trail drive, a firearm was far less useful than a good pair of boots or a durable rain slicker. Many trail bosses, including your new boss O'Malley, actually forbade their men from carrying guns while working. The risk of an accidental discharge causing a stampede was far too great. The image of every cowboy having a six-shooter strapped to his hip is a pure Hollywood invention. Historians who have studied photographs and records from the period confirm that routine wearing of sidearms was uncommon. Finally, you are shown the saddles. They are the most expensive items in the store, costing more than the horse that goes under them. A cowboy's saddle was his office, his workbench, and his most important tool. You, being at the bottom of the ladder, don't get to own one. You will be using one of the worn-out, mismatched saddles from the outfit's collection, likely with a broken spring or a cracked frame. You leave the store, dressed in your new, awkward uniform. You feel like a child playing dress-up. The clothes are stiff and alien. The boots pinch your feet, the denim chafes your legs, and the hat feels heavy and oversized on your head. Everything is designed for a life your body doesn't yet understand. There is a long-standing debate among historians and anthropologists about the nature of cowboy culture. Was it a genuine, organic folk culture that grew out of the unique demands of the work? Or was it a manufactured culture, heavily influenced and later defined by the dime novels and Wild West shows that romanticized it? Looking at your new gear, you sense the answer is both. The practicality of the boots and the hat is undeniable, born from necessity. The mythology that would later be attached to these items, that was something else entirely. Right now, there is no swagger. There is only the uncomfortable reality of a uniform for a job you don't know how to do. A job that is already costing you money you haven't earned yet. You walk back to the corral, each step in your new boots a stiff, painful reminder of the long, hard road ahead. The first rays of dawn are just beginning to streak the eastern sky, a pale, gray light that promises another day of heat. But you've been awake for an hour already. Your new life as a cowboy begins not with a noble ride into the sunrise, but with the harsh, Grating sound of cookie, the cook banging a metal spoon on a cast iron pan. Grubs on. Get up or get left. He bellows, his voice a weapon against sleep. This is your new alarm clock. The cowboy's day is brutally long, dictated by the needs of the cattle and the movement of the sun. It begins before dawn and ends long after dusk. Your body aching from a night spent on the hard, cold ground. Every muscle complains. You join the line of other hands shuffling towards the chequagon, a line you are expected to be at the end of. The chequagon is the nerve center of the entire operation. It's a modified farm wagon, ingeniously designed by a man named Charles Goodnight, a legendary Texas cattleman. The back of the wagon features a hinged chuck box that folds down to create a cook's work table, with dozens of small drawers and cubbies for storing everything from spices to medical supplies. It's a masterpiece of practical, mobile engineering. The cook is the undisputed king of this domain, and his mood sets the tone for the entire outfit. A good, even-tempered cook was considered more valuable than a top cowboy. Unfortunately, your cookie is not one of them. You hold out your tin plate, and he slops a ladle of olive brown, viscous mush onto it. He fills your cup with a dark, steaming liquid. This is breakfast. The mush is a simple concoction of cornmeal and water, maybe with a bit of grease for flavor if you're lucky. The drink is cowboy coffee. This isn't a finely brewed beverage. It's made by boiling coarse coffee grounds directly in a pot of water. To settle the grounds, the cook might toss in a rag, shell and all, or even a live coal from the fire. The result is a bitter, gritty, incredibly potent brew that is designed less for taste and more for its ability to jolt a man awake. You find a spot on the ground and start to eat. There is no talking. The men eat with a silent, focused intensity. There is an unwritten rule of the trail. You never complain about the food, at least not where the cook can hear you. A disgruntled cook could make your life miserable in 100 subtle ways. The diet on a cattle drive was staggeringly monotonous. It revolved around what was cheap, portable, and non-perishable. The holy trinity of the trail was beans, bacon, and coffee. You would eat beans for breakfast, beans for dinner, and if you were lucky, something other than beans for lunch. The bacon was heavily salted to preserve it, making it tough and incredibly salty. Fresh vegetables or fruits were non-existent. The one vegetable you might get was a prairie salad, canned tomatoes, a luxury item. This incredibly limited diet led to a host of health problems. Without vitamin C, men were susceptible to scurvy, though full-blown cases were rare on the shorter, later drives. More common were digestive issues. A diet consisting almost entirely of beans and greasy bacon with no fiber could lead to severe constipation, a painful and surprisingly debilitating condition on the trail. Some cowboys carried their own personal remedies, often powerful laxatives, to deal with the problem. Unglamorous detail that the movies conveniently leave out. There is a historical debate about how much the cowboys' diet contributed to their notoriously irritable tempers. Did a constant state of digestive discomfort and nutritional deficiency make men more prone to arguments and violence? While it's impossible to quantify, it's hard to imagine that a man subsisting on this kind of food for 3 months would be in a cheerful state of mind. After the grim meal, the work begins. The herd, which has been grazing loosely overnight, needs to be rounded up and started on the trail. This is a slow, methodical process, not a wild gallop. The goal is to move the cattle calmly, keeping them from losing weight. A typical day's travel was only 10 to 15 miles. Your job as the wrangler's assistant is to help gather the remuda, the herd of about 100 spare horses. Each cowboy on the drive has a string of several horses assigned to him, and he'll switch to a fresh mount several times a day. You, on foot, help the head wrangler chase the horses into a rope corral. It's dusty, frustrating work. The horses are smarter than you are and seem to enjoy making you run in circles. Finally, the great herd is moving. It's a massive, slow-moving river of horns and hides, stretching for over a mile. The air is filled with a constant, lowing sound and a thick cloud of dust that you can see for miles. The cowboys take up their positions to point riders at the front, swing and flank riders at the front, and the unfortunate drag riders at the rear, who spend their entire day eating the dust kicked up by 2,000 head of cattle. You are not yet trusted to be one of them. Your place is with the Chukwagon and the Remuda, following behind the main herd. You look at the long, slow procession ahead of you, a journey of 1,000 miles that must be covered at a walking pace. The initial thrill of the departure has already evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization of the sheer, soul-crushing boredom that lies ahead. The grand adventure has begun, and it looks a lot like a long, slow, dusty walk. Days begin to bleed into one another, each one a near-perfect copy of the last. You wake before dawn, force down the same meal, and begin the slow, plodding march north. The landscape, which at first seemed so vast and majestic, has become a monotonous, rolling green-brown canvas that never changes. The sun beats down relentlessly from a featureless blue sky. This is the great, unsung enemy of the cowboy, not outlaws, not stampedes, but profound, mind-numbing boredom. Your daily life is a cycle of repetitive, unglamorous tasks. You help the wrangler, whose name is Jed, a silent old man who communicates mostly through grunts and hand gestures. You spend your mornings chasing the remuda, your afternoons mending tack, and your evenings standing guard over the horses. There is none of the galloping action you read about in the dime novels. The work is slow, methodical, and exhausting in its sameness. The sounds of the trail become your entire world. The constant lowing of the cattle, the rhythmic creak of the Chukwagon's wheels, the jingle of harness, the soft thud of thousands of hooves on the prairie turf. At first, it's a cacophony. After a week, it becomes a kind of white noise, a sound so constant that silence itself would feel jarring and unnatural. To combat the crushing monotony, cowboys develop their own simple forms of entertainment. At night, around the campfire, after the second meal of beans and bacon, a man might pull out a harmonica and play a simple, mournful tune. Or someone might sing. The cowboy songs you've heard on the radio are often polished, harmonized versions of the real thing. The authentic songs of the trail were often slow, sad ballads about lost love, life back home, or, most commonly, the death of a fellow cowboy. They were sung in a high, nasal, and often off-key voice, a style designed to carry over the open spaces. The lyrics were often improvised, with verses added or changed from one drive to the next. This is a major point of interest for folklorists and historians. The cattle trail was a unique environment that created its own distinct folk culture. Because the workforce was so diverse, a mix of white Southerners, black freedmen, and Hispanic vaqueros, the music and stories were a rich blend of different traditions. The very word cowboy has its roots in this cultural mix, as do many of their techniques and much of their gear, which were adapted directly from the Mexican vaquero tradition. Here's a quirky detail about trail life, the extreme superstition. In a world where so much was left to chance, the weather, the mood of the cattle, the location of the next water, sourcemen developed a host of rituals and beliefs to try and exert some control over their environment. For example, it was considered terrible luck to kill a coyote. Many cowboys believed that the coyote's spirit would come back to haunt the herd and cause a stampede. Similarly, a cowboy would never change the name of his horse Stampede, believing it would bring misfortune. These superstitions were a way of making sense of a world that was largely random and dangerous. The social dynamics of the outfit are a constant, unspoken drama. You are still the outsider, the green pea. The other cowboys play endless, subtle pranks on you. They send you to the cook to ask for a left-handed monkey wrench. They tell you to stand watch for the great horned owl, a mythical creature that doesn't exist. These aren't just mean-spirited jokes, they are tests. They are checking your temper, your resilience, your sense of humor. How you react determines your place in the hierarchy. If you get angry, you fail. If you play along, you slowly begin to earn a sliver of respect. There's a debate among social historians about the nature of the cowboys' famous individualism. Were they truly the lone, self-reliant figures of myth, or was the trail drive a highly collectivist interdependent enterprise? The answer you're discovering is that it was both. Out on the prairie, a man had to be self-sufficient, able to handle himself and his horse. But the success of the entire drive depended on the crew working together as a seamless unit. A single man's mistake could endanger everyone. It was a strange paradox, a culture that prized fierce independence while demanding absolute cooperation. You spend your long hours thinking. There's nothing else to do. You think about your old life, which now seems like a distant dream. You think about the absurdity of this new life, moving to 1,000 animals across the continent for $10 a month. The initial romance of the West has been completely sandblasted away, leaving only the hard, unvarnished truth of the work. One evening, Jed, the old wrangler, wordlessly hands you a piece of wood and a knife. He gestures for you to start whittling. It's a small, simple act, but it feels significant. It's an invitation, a recognition that you are here to stay, that you are part of this monotonous, floating world. You take the wood and begin to carve, your hands clumsy at first. It's not much, but it's something to do. It's a way to mark the passage of time, one slow, deliberate cut at a time, as the great, silent, boring river of the cattle drive flows ever northward. The bland, repetitive meals from the Chakwagon continue to be a source of quiet misery. You've grown accustomed to the bitter coffee and the pasty cornmeal, but your body craves something. Anything with flavor and texture. You've even started to look forward to the beans, simply because they are a different shape from the breakfast mush. Food has ceased to be a source of pleasure. It is merely fuel, and poor quality fuel at that. One afternoon, Cookie the cook announces that HES making a special treat for dinner, son of a bitch stew. The older cowboys let out a few whoops of genuine excitement. You are intrigued. The name is bizarre, but their enthusiasm is infectious. Maybe, just maybe, you're about to have a decent meal. As the sun sets, you watch Cookie prepare the stew in a large cast-iron Dutch oven over the fire. You see him chopping up some fresh meat, which is a rare event. Usually, the only meat you eat is the salted bacon, or if a calf is injured and has to be put down. This time, a young steer was dispatched specifically for this meal. You lean closer, trying to see what cuts of meat HES using, and then you see them. It's not steak or roast. He throws in the heart, the liver, the kidneys. Then he adds the tongue, the sweetbreads, which are actually the thymus gland and pancreas, and the stomach lining, or tripe. The final, and most essential, ingredient he adds is the marrow gut. This is a section of the small intestine that is rich in digestive juices and fat. He doesn't even bother to clean it thoroughly, as the half-digested milk and grass inside are considered crucial for the stew's unique flavor. To top it all off, he adds the brains, which break down on act as a thickening agent. You watch this culinary horror show unfold, your appetite vanishing completely. This isn't a treat, it's just made from all the parts of the animal that a butcher would normally throw away. The name, son of a bitch stew, comes from the fact that it has a little bit of everything in it, except the horn, hide, and hoof. Another legend says it's because the calf's mother would be mighty upset if she knew what you were doing to her baby. This dish is a classic example of frontier cuisine, born from a philosophy of absolute necessity and zero waste. In a world where food was scarce, every single part of an animal was a valuable source of calories and nutrients. The organs, which spoil quickly, had to be eaten first, hence the tradition of making the stew right after a fresh kill. Historians of food and culture point to dishes like this as a window into the harsh realities of frontier life. It wasn't about taste, it was about survival. There is, of course, a debate about the exact authentic recipe for son of a bitch stew. Some old-time cooks swore that the key was to add a bit of chili or wild onions for flavor. Others insisted that any seasoning beyond salt and pepper was a modern corruption of the original. It's a strangely passionate culinary debate about a dish that most modern people would be afraid to even smell. When the stew is finally ready, the cowboys line up eagerly, their tin plates outstretched. You hang back, your stomach churning. O'Malley, the trail boss, notices your hesitation. "Eat up, son," he says, not unkindly. "There's more vitamins in that pot than we'll see for the next month. It'll put hair on your chest." You reluctantly take a plate. It's a grayish-brown, lumpy concoction with a disturbingly complex aroma. You take a small bite. The texture is a confusing mix of chewy, soft, and gelatinous. The flavor is intense. It's deeply irony, game-y, and has a strange, slightly sour aftertaste from the marrow gut. It is, without a doubt, the most challenging thing you have ever eaten. But as you force down a few more spoonfuls, you notice something. A warmth is spreading through you, a feeling of deep, replenishing energy. The other cowboys are eating with gusto, wiping their plates clean with pieces of hardtack biscuit. They are not just eating, they are refueling their bodies with a powerful dose of protein, fat, and minerals. This meal is a turning point for you. It's a lesson in perspective. You came to the West with a city palate with notions of what food should be. Here, those notions are a useless luxury. Food is not about enjoyment. It's about what will keep you alive and in the saddle for another day. You look down at the strange, unappetizing stew in your plate, and for the first time, you see it not as disgusting, but as necessary. You see it as survival. With a newfound resolve, you pick up your spoon and finish your dinner, every last bite. You might not like it, but you are a part of this world now. And this is what it tastes like. Weeks have passed on the trail. The soft green of the southern plains has given way to a harder, drier landscape. The sun feels hotter, the dust is thicker, and the cattle are growing restless. One afternoon, a strange stillness falls over the prairie. The air becomes heavy and humid, and the sky to the west turns a bruised, greenish black. The experienced cowboys exchange nervous glances. You feel a prickling on your skin, an electric charge in the air. O'Malley rides up, his face grim. Looks like a storm's coming. He yells over the rising wind. "Keep him tight, and for God's sake, keep him quiet." This is the moment every cowboy fears. Cattle are naturally skittish animals, and nothing terrifies them more than a thunderstorm. The combination of flashing lightning and booming thunder can trigger their deepest instinct to run, blindly and uncontrollably. A stampede is not just an inconvenience, it's a catastrophic event. It can destroy the entire herd, scattering them for miles, and it is one of the most common ways for a cowboy to die. The storm hits with terrifying speed. The sky opens up, unleashing a torrent of rain, so thick you can barely see the cattle in front of you. The rain is ice cold, soaking through your clothes in seconds. Then comes the lightning. It's not just distant flashes, it's blinding. Jagged spears of light that strike the ground all around you, followed instantly by a deafening crash of thunder that feels like it's shaking your very bones. The herd begins to moan, a low, guttural sound of rising panic. They start to mill about, pressing against each other, their eyes wide with terror. This is the critical moment. The cowboys begin to sing. It's not the cheerful singing of the campfire, it's a low, continuous, monotonous crooning. The idea is to create a constant, human sound to soothe the cattle and mask the terrifying thunder. You joining, your voice trembling, singing whatever tune comes to mind. It feels utterly absurd, singing to 2,000 terrified animals in the middle of a biblical deluge. But then it happens. A bolt of lightning strikes a tree on a nearby ridge, and it explodes in a shower of sparks. That's the final trigger. The collective moan of the herd turns into a roar. The ground begins to tremble. The cattle at the edge of the herd turn and begin to run, and the panic spreads like a virus. In a matter of seconds, the entire herd is a single, unstoppable entity, a river of horns and hooves and blind terror, moving at 30 miles an hour across the open prairie. A stampede. O'Malley's voice cuts through the chaos. Turn M, we gotta turn M. The strategy for handling a stampede is one of the most dangerous maneuvers in the cowboy's playbook. You can't stop the herd from the front. You would be trampled into nothingness in an instant. The only hope is to ride alongside the leaders of the stampede, the fastest and most terrified cattle at the front, and slowly force them to turn. The goal is to get the herd to run in a large circle, a mill, until they exhaust themselves and the panic subsides. You are on your horse, your heart hammering against your ribs. Your horse, the seasoned cow pony, is just as terrified as you are, but its training takes over. You find yourself riding alongside the other cowboys, galloping at full speed in the driving rain and the darkness, which is illuminated only by the strobing flashes of lightning. This is where the true horror of a stampede becomes clear. The ground is uneven, pockmarked with prairie dog holes and hidden gullies. If your horse stumbles, if it steps in a hole, you will both go down. And if you fall, you will be consumed by the thousands of hooves behind you. There would be nothing left to bury. Historians who study the records of cattle drives find that stampedes were frighteningly common. A herd might stampede a dozen times on a single drive. The causes could be anything from a thunderstorm to a cowboy lighting a match, the howl of a coyote, or even a horse shaking its saddle. There's a persistent debate about whether certain herds were just naturally more skittish than others. Some old-time cowboys swore that cattle from certain regions of Texas were spoiled and more prone to running for no reason. A quirky, and probably apocryphal, piece of cowboy lore is the idea of a led steer. Some legends claim that certain intelligent steers could be trained to lead the herd and would help calm them during a storm. While it's true that herds did have natural leaders, the idea of a specially trained Judas steer on a trail drive is likely a romantic invention. You are no longer a green pea. In this moment of pure, adrenaline-fueled survival, you are just a cowboy. You ride low in the saddle, your face stung by the rain, your voice raw from shouting and singing. You can smell the fear coming off the cattle, a hot, animal smell. You ride for what feels like an eternity, a tiny, fragile human trying to impose your will on a force of nature. Slowly, agonizingly, it begins to work. The led cattle start to turn. The straight, terrifying line of the stampede begins to bend into a curve. The roar of the hooves becomes a deafening, circling vortex. The herd is milling. The immediate danger has passed, but the work is far from over. Now you will have to ride in this tight, terrifying circle for hours, until the last animal has calmed down. You are soaked, freezing, and utterly exhausted. But you are alive, and in the process, you've lost another thick layer of the romanticism you came here with. This isn't an adventure. This is a war against chaos, and you just barely won a single battle. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and deceptively calm. The sun rises on a scene of quiet devastation. The cattle are scattered for miles across the soaked prairie, grazing placidly as if nothing happened. Your work, however, is just beginning. The entire day, and possibly the next, will be spent rounding up the strays, a tedious and exhausting process, but there's a more immediate problem. The trail boss, O'Malley, announces that you've lost over 100 head of cattle, and you are approaching the Cimarron River. You have to cross it today. Rivers were the great, natural obstacles of the cattle drives. There were no bridges. Crossing a river was a dangerous and unpredictable undertaking that every cowboy dreaded. The Cimarron, in particular, was notorious. Its name is a Spanish word that can mean wild or unruly, and it was well earned. Its placid appearance was deceiving. It was known for its treacherous currents and pockets of quicksand. You ride to the riverbank and look out at the water. It's wide brown and swollen from the recent storm. The current is moving with a slow, powerful force. O'Malley and the top hands ride up and down the bank, searching for the safest place to cross, a spot with a firm riverbed and a gentle slope on the opposite side. The strategy for a river crossing is a delicate and dangerous art. First, they have to get the cattle into the water. Cattle are not natural swimmers and are terrified of deep water. The cowboys will push a group of lead steers to the edge, shouting and waving their hats, trying to force them in. Once the first few are swimming, the rest of the herd will usually follow, driven by instinct. Today, the cattle are still spooked from the storm and refuse to go in. O'Malley, his patience worn thin, makes a decision. He points to one of the most experienced cowboys, who is of Mexican descent and grew up on the Rio Grande. Flores rides his horse to the water's edge, dismounts, and slaps his horse to send it across. Then, he pulls off his boots, takes a deep breath, and dives into the cold, murky water, swimming ahead of the lead steers. Incredibly brave act designed to show the cattle that it's safe. It works. The lead steers tentatively follow him, and soon the entire herd is plunging into the river. Now the real chaos begins. The river becomes a churning mass of horns, heads, and struggling bodies. The cowboys ride into the water alongside the herd, their horses swimming, their legs soaked. Their job is to keep the herd moving in a straight line towards the opposite bank. If the cattle start to drift downstream with the current, the entire herd could be swept away. You are on the downstream side. You're on the downstream side, your horse paddling hard against the current. The water is shockingly cold, and the force of it threatens to pull your horse's legs out from under it. You see a young calf being swept away, its head barely above the water. Another cowboy, with incredible skill, ropes it and drags it back towards its mother. This is where many cowboys met their end. If a horse panicked or was pulled under, its rider, weighed down by wet clothes and heavy boots, had little chance of survival. Drowning was a far more common cause of death on the trail than a gunshot wound. Many cowboys, despite living their lives outdoors, never learned how to swim. It was a skill that had little use on the dry plains until the moment it became the only skill that mattered. A fascinating and grim piece of cowboy lore is the river payroll. Some outfits would pay a bonus to the cowboys for a successful river crossing, acknowledging the extreme danger. However, if a man drowned during the crossing, his wages and the bonus were often simply absorbance. There was no life insurance, no compensation for the family. A man's life was worth the $10 a month he was paid, and not a cent more. Historians debate the full extent of the death toll on these drives. Records were poorly kept, and many men who died were simply buried in an unmarked grave along the trail. Estimates suggest that for every 1,000 miles of trail, there could be as many as a dozen graves. The cattle drive was a business with an accepted rate of human loss. You see a cow get stuck in what looks like shallow water. Its legs are sinking into the riverbed. It's quicksand. The cow panics, struggling wildly, which only makes it sink faster. There is nothing anyone can do. The other cattle swim around it, their eyes wide. You watch, helpless, as the animal slowly disappears beneath the brown water. It's a quiet, horrifying spectacle. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, the lead steers find their footing on the far bank. They clamber up the muddy slope, and the rest of the herd follows. You and your horse finally emerge from the river, soaked, shivering, and exhausted. The chuckwagon, which had to be carefully caulked and floated across, is already there with cookies starting a fire. You made it. The herd is across, albeit with some losses. You dismount, your legs unsteady, and pour the water out of your boots. You look back at the wide brown river, moving as placidly as before, as if nothing had happened. It's another reminder of the indifference of this land. It doesn't care if you live or die. It will just keep flowing, and you, and what's left of the herd, have no choice but to keep moving on. The sun beats down with a vengeance. The landscape has become even more arid, and the daily grind of the trail is starting to take a physical toll, not just on your spirit, but on your body. You are in a state of constant, low-grade pain. Every part of you hurts in a new and interesting way. This is the unwritten chapter of the cowboy myth, a life of chronic, untreated physical ailments. Your most immediate problem is your skin. You spend 12 to 14 hours a day in the saddle, and the constant friction between your skin, your rough denim pants, and the leather of the saddle has created a collection of painful sores and boils on your inner thighs and backside. This condition was so common it had its own name, saddle sores. It wasn't just a minor annoyance. It could become a serious, debilitating injury. If a sore became infected in this pre-antibiotic era, it could lead to blood poisoning and death. You watch the veteran cowboys and notice their bow-legged walk. You always thought this was just a funny caricature from the movies. But you realize now it's a physical deformity caused by a lifetime spent on horseback. Their leg bones had literally been warped by the constant pressure. You also notice their hands. They are a mess of rope burns, calluses, and old, poorly healed fractures. A cowboy's hands were his primary tools, and they bore the scars of his trade. Then there are the more serious injuries. Broken bones were a constant threat. A fall from a horse, a kick from a steer, or getting caught under a tumbling wagon could easily result in a fractured leg or arm. There was no hospital, no clinic, no orthopedic surgeon. The doctor on a cattle drive was usually the cook, who would do his best with a bottle of whiskey for anesthetic and a few wooden splints. Setting a bone correctly was a matter of sheer luck. Most cowboys who suffered a serious fracture would be left with a permanent lump or a useless limb, their career over in an instant. Here's a particularly cringe-inducing piece of frontier medicine. If a cowboy suffered a deep, gaping wound, one of the common methods for closing it was to use ant stitches. The cook would find a large black ant, get it to bite the edges of the wound together with its powerful pincers, and then twist the ant's body off, leaving the head in place as a natural, biological suture. It's a testament to their ingenuity, but also to the sheer desperation of their medical situation. The diet, or lack thereof, continues to cause problems. The constant diet of greasy bacon and beans has your digestive system in a permanent state of rebellion. You are perpetually dehydrated, as water is often scarce and, as you know, dangerous to drink. This chronic dehydration leads to headaches, fatigue, and kidney problems. The constant exposure to the sun with no sunscreen has burned your skin a dark, leathery brown. You can see the older cowboys. Their face is a road map of wrinkles and sunspots, and you know you're looking at your own future. Skin cancer, though they didn't have a name for it then, was likely a common and fatal, and for many career cowboys, there's an ongoing historical discussion about the average lifespan of a 19th century cowboy. It's a difficult number to pin down due to poor records, but the consensus is that it was not long. While they were spared many of the communicable diseases of the crowded eastern cities, their high-risk lifestyle, poor nutrition, and lack of medical care meant that a man who survived into his 40s was considered an old-timer. The cowboy life was a young man's game, and it burned them out quickly. One evening, you see one of the older cowboys, a man named Silas, trying to mount his horse. He moves with a stiffness and pain that seems to go beyond the usual trail weariness. He has the rheumatism, a catch-all term for what was likely severe arthritis, brought on by years of hard labor and exposure to the elements. You watch him struggle for a moment before another cowboy quietly goes over and helps him into the saddle. There is no comment, no joke, just a moment of quiet, shared understanding. They all knew that this was the inevitable future waiting for them, if they were lucky enough to survive that long. You lie in your bedroll that night, taking a mental inventory of your own aches and pains. Your back throbs, your knees ache, and your hands sting. You are not a hero on a grand adventure. You are a manual laborer in a high-risk profession, and your body is the price of admission. The Western myth is built on images of strength and vitality, but the reality you're living is one of slow, steady physical decay. You are being worn down, ground down by the trail, one painful day at a time, and there is no one to fix you but yourself, and no medicine more powerful than the hope that tomorrow might hurt a little bit less. The trail has led you into a landscape that feels actively hostile. The gentle, rolling plains are a distant memory, replaced by a harsh, rocky terrain of canyons and arroyos. The heat is dry and suffocating. The work of moving the cattle through this broken land is slow and dangerous. But the most immediate threat is no longer the grand, dramatic danger of a stampede or a river crossing. It's the small, quiet, and deadly inhabitants of this new environment. One afternoon, while you're helping Jed the Wrangler round up a few stray horses, you hear it. A sound like a baby's rattle, but dry, sharp, and chillingly close. Jed freezes instantly, his hand held up in a silent command for you to stop. You both stand motionless, scanning the ground. And then you see it. Coiled in the shade of a scrubby bush, not more than 10 feet from you, is a rattlesnake. It's a diamond bank, thick as your arm, its tail vibrating with that terrible, iconic warning. Your blood runs cold. In the dime novels, a snake bite is a moment of high drama, where the hero bravely sucks the venom from the wound. In reality, it's a terrifying and often fatal medical emergency with no effective treatment. The venom of a rattlesnake is a complex cocktail of toxins. It's a hemotoxin, meaning it attacks your blood and tissues, causing massive swelling, excruciating pain, and internal bleeding. It's also a neurotoxin, which can affect your nervous system, leading to paralysis and respiratory failure. Jed slowly, deliberately, begins to back away, never taking his eyes off the snake. He gestures for you to do the same. You move backward, one slow, terrified step at a time, your heart pounding in your ears. The snake watches you go, its rattle never ceasing, until you are a safe distance away. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it uncoils and slithers away into the rocks. You let out a shaky breath. Jed just shakes his head. Gotta watch your step out here, kid, he says, one of his longest sentences to you so far. They like the shade. Same place as we do. This is a fundamental truth of the West. The dangers were not always large and loud. They were often small, silent, and hidden. Cowboys were far more likely to die from a snake bite, a scorpion sting, or the bite of a venomous spider than from a gunfight. A man walking through the tall grass at night or reaching into a dark space for firewood was literally taking his life in his hands. The cures for snakebite were a grim collection of folk remedies and medical malpractice. The most common treatment was to make deep cuts over the fang marks and try to bleed out the venom. This, of course, just caused more tissue damage and increased the risk of infection. Another popular remedy was to apply a poultice made of mud and chewed tobacco, which did nothing. The most common prescription from a frontier doctor was a massive dose of whiskey, administered until the patient passed out. The theory was that the alcohol would neutralize the venom. In reality, it just made the patient drunk while they were dying. The only thing that might have worked, the sucking out the venom method, is now known to be completely ineffective and dangerous for the rescuer. There's a fascinating and macabre debate among toxicologists and historians about the lethality of historical snake bites. Were the rattlesnakes of the 19th century more venomous than they are today, or were the high mortality rates simply a product of the complete lack of effective medical care? The consensus leans towards the latter. A modern, healthy adult who received prompt medical attention and antivenom has a greater than 99% chance of surviving a rattlesnake bite. Those odds would be tragically reversed. The encounter with the snake leaves you feeling deeply unsettled. It's a reminder that this land is not empty. It's filled with things that see you as a threat or worse, as food. The experience changes the way you walk, the way you see the landscape. Every shadow now seems to hold a potential threat. Every rock could be hiding a coiled predator, a quirky piece of cowboy, or is their relationship with another desert creature, the tarantula. Despite their terrifying appearance, Tarantulas were often seen as a sign of good luck. Their venom is not dangerous to humans, and they are voracious predators of other, more dangerous insects and scorpions. Some cowboys would even keep them as temporary pets in their camps, appreciating their free pest control services. As you lie in your bedroll that night, you can't shake the image of the snake. The sound of its rattle seems to echo in the quiet of the night. You face the large-scale dangers of the trail, the stampede, the river, the storm. But there's something uniquely terrifying about a threat so small, so silent, and so utterly final. It's a humbling realization. In this vast, unforgiving landscape, you are not the apex predator. You are just another soft, slow-moving creature, and you are trespassing on someone else's territory. And you'd better learn to watch your step. The trail moves you out of the rocky canyons and onto a vast, flat plain that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The sun is a merciless, white-hot disk in a pale sky. There are no trees, no hills, no features of any kind to break the monotony or offer a sliver of shade. The heat is a physical presence, a heavy, shimmering blanket that smothers the world. And then, one afternoon, the sky, which has been clear for weeks, begins to look hazy. A dark line appears on the horizon, growing steadily larger. It's not a storm cloud, it's a wall of water. You are about to witness one of the most terrifying unsurreal phenomena of the American West, the flash flood. On the flat, sun-baked plains, the ground is often as hard as concrete. When a powerful thunderstorm occurs, sometimes 50 or 100 miles away in the distant mountains, the rain doesn't soak into the ground. It sheets across the surface, gathering in dry riverbeds and arroyos, creating a sudden, violent torrent of water that moves with incredible speed and power across a landscape that, moments before, was bone dry. Oh, Maui sees it coming. He lets out a yell that cuts through the heat-induced lethargy. Flood, get to high ground. Now, the command is absurd. There is no high ground. The plain is as flat as a tabletop. The only high ground is a barely perceptible rise a few hundred yards away, a swell in the earth no more than 10 feet higher than where you are. But it's your only hope. A frantic scramble begins. The cowboys shout and whip their horses, trying to push the confused herd towards the slight rise. The cattle, smelling the approaching water, begin to panic. The low, rumbling sound of the approaching flood is growing louder, a deep, guttural roar that seems to come from the earth itself. You are riding hard, your heart in your throat, the scene taking on a nightmarish, slow-motion quality. You can see the flood now. It's not a gentle wave, it's a churning, brown wall of water, mud, and debris, carrying with it uprooted trees, dead animals, and rocks. You reach the small rise, just as the first wave hits. The water slams into the base of the hill, splashing and churning. You turn in your saddle and watch in horror as the flood engulfs the land where you were standing just moments ago. The power is terrifying. It's not just water, it's a liquid battering ram. The main body of the herd is safe on the rise with you, but the drag riders and the cattle at the rear are not so lucky. They are caught in the flood. You see a cow lose its footing, tumble end over end, and disappear into the brown torrent. You see one of the cowboys, a young man named Billy, get separated from the herd. His horse is struggling, swimming desperately, but the current is too strong. The horse is pulled under, and Billy is thrown into the water. He surfaces for a moment, his arm outstretched, his face a mask of terror, and then he too is gone, swallowed by the flood. There is nothing anyone can do. The other cowboys sit on their horses, their faces dark with shock and grief, watching the relentless churning water. The roar is deafening. The entire world seems to have been reduced to this single, catastrophic event. Flash floods were a constant and unpredictable danger, especially in the arid regions of the Southwest. A party of travelers could camp for the night in a dry, sandy wash, only to be awakened by a 10-foot wall of water, giving them no time to escape. Historians who study pioneer diaries and military records from the period find countless accounts of these sudden, devastating events. They were acts of God in the truest sense, random, unsurvivable, and utterly indifferent to human life. A strange and little-known fact is that some Native American tribes in the Southwest had a deep, almost spiritual understanding of this phenomenon. Their oral traditions contain stories and warnings about the dangers of the dry river's anger, and their knowledge of the landscape allowed them to recognize the subtle signs of a distant storm that a white settler would completely miss. They knew which canyons to avoid and where the safe, high ground was. This was a form of knowledge far more valuable than any map. The historical debate around this topic often centers on land use. Some environmental historians argue that the intensive grazing of millions of cattle during this period exacerbated the problem of flash floods. The cattle stripped the plains of their natural grasses, which helped to hold the soil and absorb water. This degradation of the landscape, they argue, made the ground even less permeable and the floods even more severe. The water rages for what feels like hours, though it's probably only 20 minutes. Then, as quickly as it came, it begins to recede. The roar subsides, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the nervous lowing of the cattle. The landscape is transformed. The plain is now a vast, shallow lake of thick, brown mud, littered with the debris of the flood. The trail is gone, the grazing is gone, and Billy is gone, and Billy is gone, and Billy is gone. There will be no search party, no attempt to recover his body. It's an impossible task. He has been reclaimed by the wilderness. Later that evening, O'Malley will simply write in his logbook, "Lost one hand, Billy, to a flood." It's a blunt, unsentimental epitaph for a young life cut short. You sit on your horse, shivering, looking out at the muddy wasteland, and you fear. It's a fear born of helplessness, of the realization that no matter how skilled or tough you are, some forces are simply too big to fight. All you can do is hope you're standing in the right place when they come. The aftermath of the flash flood is a world of mud. The ground is a thick, sticky morass that pulls at your boots and sucks at the hooves of your horse. Progress is agonizingly slow, each step a struggle. The sun has returned with a vengeance, and it begins to bake the mud, creating a hard, cracked crust over a soft, treacherous interior. But the immediate problem is the sun itself. After the brief, violent reprieve of the storm, the heat has returned, more oppressive than ever. You are living in a world without shade. The relentless glare of the sun is your constant companion from dawn until dusk. Your wide-brimmed hat, which once felt so cumbersome, is now the most important piece of clothing you own. It creates a small, mobile pocket of shade, a tiny island of relief in a sea of blinding light. The heat affects everything. The leather of your saddle is hot to the touch. The metal of your tin cup will burn your lips if you're not careful. The air shimmers, creating mirages on the horizon, ghostly lakes and distant trees that vanish as you approach. At first, they are a curiosity. After a few days, they become a form of psychological torture, a constant, shimmering reminder of what you don't have. Dehydration is a constant, gnawing threat. The water barrels on the chuckwagon are low, and the water that's left is warm and tastes of stale wood. You are rationed to a few cups a day, barely enough to keep you functioning. Your lips are chapped, your skin is dry and cracked, and you have a persistent, dull headache that never goes away. This is the beginning of heat exhaustion, and if it progresses, it can lead to heat stroke, a life-threatening condition where your body's internal temperature rises to a fatal level. You see the effects of the heat on the cattle. They are listless, their heads hanging low, their tongues lolling from their mouths. Their pace slows to a crawl. A cow that lies down from exhaustion will often never get up again. It's a quiet, slow-motion disaster. The cowboys, tough as they are not immune. You see them wrapping their bandanas around their necks, dipping them in the precious water to provide a few moments of cool relief. They've become nocturnal, doing most of the hard work in the cooler hours of the early morning and late evening, and spending the peak of the afternoon in a state of semi-hibernation. This is where one of the most iconic but misunderstood parts of cowboy life comes into play: the siesta. The tradition, borrowed directly from the Spanish and Mexican vaqueros, was not a sign of laziness. It was a vital survival strategy. In the hottest parts of the Southwest, trying to work through the midday sun was not just inefficient, it was suicidal. The ability to find a small patch of shade, lie down, and conserve energy for a few hours was a crucial skill. Historians who study the time discipline of the 19th century find a fascinating clash of cultures here. The industrializing East was developing a rigid, clock-based sense of time, where work was measured in hours and minutes. The West, particularly the Southern cattle culture, operated on a more natural, event-based time. You worked when the sun and the cattle allowed you to work, and you rested when they demanded you rest. This difference in philosophy was a source of great misunderstanding between Anglo-American and Hispanic cultures. A strange and little-known medical condition that plagued people in this environment was alkali poisoning. In many arid regions, the water that collected in shallow pools would evaporate, leaving behind a high concentration of natural mineral salts, or alkali. Drinking this water could cause severe digestive distress, and in large quantities, it could be fatal. Cowboys had to learn to read the water, to distinguish between safe springs and deadly alkali seeps. Often, the clearest, most tempting-looking pools were the most dangerous. One afternoon, you see one of the younger cowboys, a boy no older than 17, begin to stumble as he walks. His face is flush, he's not sweating, and he's muttering to himself. It's a classic sign of advanced heat stroke. O'Malley sees it instantly. He and 2 other cowboys grab the boy, strip him of his clothes, and douse him with water from the barrel, a huge expenditure of their precious supply. They lay him in the shade under the chuckwagon, fanning him, trying to bring his body temperature down. You watch, feeling a sense of dread. You've seen death by violence and death by water. Now you're seeing how the sun can kill, not with a slow, silent cooking from the inside out. There is no debate among historians about this. The environment itself was the single greatest enemy on the frontier. The sun, the wind, the cold, the floods, these were the forces that claimed the most lives. The boy eventually recovers, but he is weak for days. The incident is a sobering lesson for everyone. You are all living on a narrow margin of survival. A few degrees of body temperature, a few cups of water, that is the thin line between life and death. As you try to sleep that night, the air is still hot and oppressive. There is no relief. The heat is not just in the air, it's in the ground, in your clothes, in your very bones, in your very bones. And the battle will continue. Just when you think you can endure another day of the relentless heat, the world changes. You have been climbing in elevation so gradually that you barely noticed, but now the air has a new, sharp crispness to it. The nights are becoming genuinely cold. One morning, you wake up to find a thin layer of frost on your bedroll. The oppressive heat of the southern plains has been replaced by the unpredictable, often violent, weather of the high country. And then, one afternoon, you see it, which was a brilliant, cloudless blue an hour ago, is now filled with dark, bruised-looking clouds rolling in from the northwest. The temperature plummets. It begins to snow. At first, it's just a few gentle flakes, a novelty that seems almost beautiful. But within minutes, it becomes a blinding, horizontal blizzard. The wind howls, a high, mournful sound that cuts through your thin clothes. Visibility drops to near zero. You can barely see the cowboy riding 10 feet in front of you. This is a blue norther, a sudden, catastrophic cold front that can drop the temperature by as much as 50 degrees in a matter of hours. The cattle, who were suffering from the heat just yesterday, are now in danger of freezing to death. They turn their backs to the wind, huddle together for warmth, and refuse to move. Your job is no longer to drive them forward, but simply to keep them together and alive. You are completely unprepared for this. Your clothing, designed for the heat, is useless against the biting cold. You pull your thin blanket from your bedroll and wrap it around your shoulders, a flimsy defense against the wind and snow. The cold is a physical pain. It seeps into your bones. Your fingers and toes quickly become numb, and you lose all feeling in them. The cowboys are struggling to control the herd, but it's a losing battle. The cattle are drifting with the wind, and the cowboys are forced to drift with them. There is no hope of making camp. There is no wood for a fire. There is nothing to do but endure. This is a scenario that played out with tragic frequency, particularly in the later years of the cattle drives when they pushed further north into Wyoming and Montana. The winter of 1886-1887, known as the Great Die-Up, was a catastrophic event where a series of brutal blizzards wiped out hundreds of thousands of cattle, effectively bankrupting the entire open-range cattle industry and ending the era of the Great Trail Drives. Cowboys who were got out on the range during that winter froze to death in their saddles. A strange and grim detail about freezing to death is the phenomenon of paradoxical undressing. People suffering from severe hypothermia often experience a sudden, intense sensation of being hot just moments before death. This leads them to tear off their clothes, and they are often found frozen, but partially undressed. It's a final, cruel trick played by a confused and failing brain. There is a historical debate about the preparedness of the cattle outfits for this kind of weather. The early Texas outfits were notoriously ill-equipped for the cold of the northern plains. They simply didn't own the heavy winter coats and gear necessary for survival. Were they ignorant of the dangers, or were they simply cutting costs, gambling with the lives of their men and their herds? The answer is likely a combination of both. The cattle business was a high-risk, high-reward enterprise, and corners were often cut. You ride through the blinding snow, your body numb, your mind in a state of shock. The world has been reduced to a swirling vortex of white. The only thing that keeps you going is the sight of the other cowboys, grim, silent figures moving through the storm alongside you. You are no longer individuals, you are a single, suffering organism bound together by a shared struggle against the elements. Sometime during the night, the snow stops. The wind dies down, leaving behind a world of profound, unnatural silence. The sky clears, revealing a canopy of brilliant, cold stars. The landscape is covered in a thick blanket of snow, sparkling under the moonlight. It's a scene of breathtaking, lethal beauty. The herd is scattered, and several cows have already frozen to death, standing upright as if they were statues. You and the other cowboys are suffering from various stages of frostbite and hypothermia. You dismount, your legs so numb you can barely stand. You huddle together with the other men, sharing what little body heat you have left, waiting for the sun to rise. You have survived the heat, the flood, and now the blizzard. You have experienced the full, violent spectrum of the western climate in the space of a few weeks. You look at the frozen landscape, at the dead cattle, and you realize that this land actively tries to kill you in 100 different ways. The romantic dream of the West is a distant, laughable memory. This is a war, and the enemy is the weather itself. That winter has just begun. The blizzard has broken, but the ordeal is far from over. The days are now a struggle against the biting cold, and the nights are a desperate fight for warmth. The experience has left its mark on the crew, both physically and mentally. One of the cowboys has severe frostbite on his feet, his toes turning a dark, ominous black. Another man has a deep, chest-rattling cough that doesn't seem to get better. Sickness, once a distant threat, is now a constant, tangible presence in the camp, and you are about to discover the horrifying reality of 19th century medicine. The man with the frostbitten feet, a young cowboy named Charlie, is in agony. O'Malley and Cookie the cook confer, their faces grim. They know that if gangrene sets in, the infection will spread and kill him. There is only one terrible option: amputation. There is no operating theater, no sterile equipment, no anesthetic. The hospital is the ground next to the Chakogan. The surgeon is Cookie, who has more experience butchering cattle than treating humans. The surgical tools are a bottle of whiskey, a hacksaw from the wagon's toolbox, and the hot coals from the fire. They give Charlie half a bottle of whiskey to drink, a crude attempt to numb the pain and his senses. Two other cowboys are tasked with holding him down. You are told to look away, but you can't. You are morbidly fascinated, watching this grim procedure unfold. Cookie takes the hacksaw, which he sterilizes by holding it in the fire for a few moments, and he begins to saw through the bones of Charlie's foot. Charlie's scream is a sound you will never forget, a raw, animal sound of pure agony that is quickly muffled as another cowboy shoves a leather strap in his mouth to bite on. After the foot is removed, Cookie takes a branding iron from the fire and cauterizes the stump, searing the flesh to stop the bleeding. The smell of burning meat fills the air, a smell you now associate with both dinner and medical emergencies. They wrap the stump in a dirty rag, give Charlie the rest of the whiskey, and hope for the best. This brutal scene was the reality of frontier surgery. Without antibiotics, the primary concern was not the procedure itself, but the subsequent infection. Cauterization, while barbaric, was one of the few effective ways to create a sterile wound surface. Other common medicines found in a trail outfit's kit were equally primitive. They might have quinine for malaria, castor oil as a purgative for digestive issues, and carbolic acid, a harsh disinfectant, for cleaning wounds. For the most part, however, treatment relied on folk remedies and sheer luck. Here's a particularly strange and widespread medical belief of the time: the worm theory of toothaches. Many people, including some doctors, genuinely believed that tooth decay was caused by a tiny worm burrowing into the tooth. The cure was to perform a ritual involving smoke and herbs to try and lure the worm out. A dentist on the frontier was a rare luxury. For most people, a toothache was cured with a pair of pliers and a strong arm. Historians who study the history of medicine often point to this period as a time of massive transition. Back east, in the great hospitals of Boston and Philadelphia, medical science was making huge leaps. Anesthesia was becoming common, the importance of sanitation was beginning to be understood, and surgery was becoming a more refined art. But this knowledge traveled west at a snail's pace. The medicine practiced on the trail was often decades, if not centuries, behind the times. It was a world where a minor injury or a common illness could easily become a death sentence. There is an ongoing debate about the overall health of the cowboy population. Some argue that their active, outdoor lifestyle and simple diet made them, on average, healthier than their city-dwelling counterparts who lived in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Others argue that the constant risk of injury, exposure, and lack of medical care made their lives far more perilous. The truth is likely complex. They may have avoided the epidemics of the city, but they traded them for a different set of dangers. You watch Charlie over the next few days, pale and feverish in the back of the Chakogan. Every man in the camp knows his survival is a coin toss. The incident casts a dark pall over the outfit. It's a stark, unavoidable reminder of their own vulnerability. They are strong, tough men, but they are made of flesh and blood, and their flesh is fragile. You look down at your own hands, at the calluses and cuts, and you think about the countless, invisible microbes that live on your skin, in the water, in the very air. You realize that the West is a place with no safety net. There is no doctor to call, no ambulance to rescue you. You are your own physician, and your pharmacy consists of a bottle of whiskey and a dirty rag. And in this new, terrifying reality, you find yourself praying, not that you'll avoid injury, but that if you do get hurt, it's something that will kill you quickly. The trail drive has finally reached its destination, a bustling, chaotic cowtown in Kansas, like Dodge City or Abilene. This is the railhead, the point where the cattle will be loaded onto trains and shipped to the slaughterhouses of the East. The journey of 1,000 miles is over. You and the other cowboys have successfully delivered several thousand head of cattle, and the sense of relief is palpable, but the town itself is a shock to the system. After months of open spaces and the company of the same dozen men, the noise, the crowds, and the sheer density of the town are overwhelming. The streets are even muddier and more chaotic than the one you started in. They are teeming with cowboys from a dozen different outfits, all celebrating the end of their respective drives. The air is thick with the smell of cattle, whiskey, and money. O'Malley sells the herd to a cattle baron, a man in a clean suit who looks strangely out of place. The deal is done, and O'Malley returns with a bag full of cash. He gathers the crew for the final time. This is the moment you've all been waiting for payday. He calls you up one by one and pays you your wages in cash. 3 months of grueling labor, of enduring stampedes, floods, blizzards, and bad food has earned you the grand total of $30. You hold the worn bills and silver coins in your hand. It feels both impossibly large and pitifully small at the same time. You are, for the first time in a long time, a man with money in your pocket. And now you face a new kind of danger. The trail may be over, but the most perilous part of a cowboy's year is just beginning. A young man with 3 months of pent-up frustration and a pocket full of cash is a magnet for trouble. The entire economy of these cow towns was built on one principle: separating a cowboy from his wages as quickly and efficiently as possible. The first stop for almost every cowboy is the bathish. You pay a few cents for a tub of hot water, a rare and unimaginable luxury. You soak for an hour, scrubbing away months of accumulated trail dust and grime. Then, you head to the barber for a shave and a haircut. Finally, you go to the general store and buy a new set of clothes, something other than the filthy, trail-worn rags you've been living in. Clean, shaven, and dressed in new clothes, you feel almost human again. Now, the town's real attractions await. The main street is lined with saloons, dance halls, and gambling dens, all blasting noise and light into the street. You and a few of the other young cowboys from your outfit decide to go on a spree. The night becomes a blur of cheap whiskey, bad decisions, and fleeting pleasures. You drink far too much. You lose a few dollars at a rigged card game. You pay a pretty saloon girl to dance with you, a brief, awkward moment of intimacy that leaves you feeling even lonelier than before. You are spending your hard-earned money at an alarming rate, and you don't even care. This isn't about fun, it's about release. It's an attempt to wash away the memory of the trail with a flood of noise and sensation. This period of a cowboy's life is a subject of much historical interest. The cowboy on a spree became a stock character in Western mythology. But what was the reality behind it? Was it just youthful exuberance? Or was it something darker? Many historians argue that this self-destructive behavior was a symptom of a kind of post-traumatic stress. After months of constant tension, danger, and sensory deprivation, the sudden release often led to an explosion of reckless behavior, an unhealthy way of coping with the psychological trauma of the trail. A fascinating, and often overlooked, aspect of cowtown life was the strict gun control. The romantic image of cowboys striding into a saloon with 6 shooters blazing is largely false. Upon entering town, cowboys were required by local ordinance to check their firearms with the town marshal or at a designated office. Signs at the edge of town would read, "The carrying of firearms is strictly prohibited." The city fathers knew that a combination of young men, alcohol, and firearms was a recipe for disaster, and they took practical steps to prevent it. The gunfights of legend were exceedingly rare. The night wears on, and your $30 is dwindling fast. You see one of your fellow cowboys from the doctor get into a pointless argument with a man from another outfit. It quickly escalates into a clumsy, drunken fistfight in the middle of the street. The town marshal, a large, bored-looking man, appears, cracks their heads together, and hauls them both off to the town jail to sleep it off. They'll be fined in the morning, further depleting their wages. You eventually stumble back to your cheap lodging house room, your head spinning, your pocket empty. The $30 is gone. You've spent 3 months' wages in a single night of manufactured fun. You lie on the lumpy mattress, the sounds of the chaotic town still ringing in your ears, and a wave of profound emptiness washes over you. The great adventure, the hard work, the paycheck, it has all led to this. A bad hangover and an empty pocket. The cattle drive is a cycle, and you are now back at the beginning. You are broke, unemployed, and in a town full of other broke, unemployed cowboys. You have a choice. You can try to find work in the town, or you can sign on with another outfit heading back south to do it all over again. As you drift into a fitful, whiskey-soaked sleep, you know, with a sense of grim resignation, what you're going to do. The trail is a brutal, thankless life, but it's the only one you know now. You wake up with a pounding headache and the bitter taste of regret in your mouth. Your pocket is empty, your brief moment of wealth a distant, hazy memory. The reality of your situation crashes down on you. You are one of hundreds of unemployed cowboys now milling about this dusty town, and the season is ending. The cattle drives are done for the year. Winter is coming, and there is no work. This is the dark underbelly of the cowboy's cyclical life. The period between trail drives was a time of great uncertainty and hardship. A cowboy had to find a way to survive the long, cold winter months on whatever was left of his meager earnings. For you, and for many others, that means there is nothing left. You start looking for work, any work. But there are few options. The saloons, stores, and livery stables only need so many permanent staff. You might find a few days' work helping to repair a fence or clean out a stable, but it's temporary, low-paying labor. The town is flooded with men, just like you, all competing for the same handful of jobs. You see what happens to the men who don't find work. Some of them turn to begging. Others, more desperate, turn to crime. Petty theft becomes more common as the weather gets colder. But being an outlaw, you quickly realize, is not the romantic profession of the dime novels. Most of these men are not bold train robbers, they are pathetic. Hungry figures who get caught trying to steal a loaf of bread or a side of bacon. Your best hope is to find a ranch that is wintering over and needs an extra hand. This is a life of monotonous, back-breaking chores. You would be a ranch hand, a far less glamorous title than cowboy. Your days would be spent chopping wood, mending fences, and most importantly, riding the line. Riding the line was the primary job of a winter ranch hand. You would be assigned a specific, remote section of the ranch's vast, unfenced territory. Your home would be a line shack, a tiny, crude cabin, often little more than a one-room sod house built into the side of a hill. You would live there alone, for weeks at a time, your only company your horse and the cattle you were supposed to be watching. Your job would be to ride the boundaries of your section every day, pushing your ranch's cattle back from the invisible line and pushing your neighbor's cattle back over it. In the winter, your main task would be to find cattle that were wrapped in snowdrifts or had fallen through the ice of a frozen river, and try to save them. It was a life of extreme isolation and profound loneliness. The psychological toll of this isolation is a topic that historians and psychologists have explored in depth. Men would spend months with no human contact, a situation that could lead to severe depression and a condition known as cabin fever. They would start talking to themselves, to their horses, to the wind. Some men went mad from the solitude. The vast, silent, snow-covered landscape that looked so beautiful from a distance became a prison. A quirky and sad detail of this life was the line shack library. A line shack would often contain a small, pathetic collection of reading material left behind by previous occupants, a few tattered dime novels, an old newspaper, maybe a Bible. A man would read these same few items over and over again until he had them memorized, simply for the comfort of seeing the printed word. There is a debate among historians about the fate of the drifters, the cowboys who didn't find winter work. What happened to them, the records are largely silent. Many likely just disappeared. They might have tried to ride the grub line, a desperate practice of riding from one ranch to another, begging for a meal and a place to sleep in the hayloft for a night before being sent on their way. Others probably just froze to death in a ditch somewhere, their passing unrecorded and unmourned. You managed to get lucky. An old, grizzled ranch foreman is hiring a few extra hands for the winter. He looks you over, sees the desperation in your eyes, and agrees to take you on. The pay is even lower than on the trail drive, just enough to keep you fed. You are assigned to a lined shack in the northern part of the ranch. The foreman gives you a sack of flour, a slab of bacon, some beans, and a bag of coffee. That's your supply for the next month. He points you in the right direction and tells you he'll see you in a few weeks. You ride out to your new home. It's even more pathetic than you imagined, a small, dark hole dug into the earth, with a leaky roof and a crude fireplace. The wind howls constantly outside. This will be your world. The grand vistas of the West have shrunk to the 4 dirt walls of this hovel. The camaraderie of the trail, however rough, has been replaced by an all-consuming silence. As you build a small fire and brew a cup of coffee, the weight of the loneliness settles on you. The cowboy myth is about freedom and open spaces. But the reality you've found is a different kind of trap. It's the trap of seasonal labor, of poverty, and now, of profound, soul-crushing isolation. You have survived the trail. But now you must survive the trail. But now you must do it completely, utterly alone. The winter drags on, a seemingly endless season of gray skies and biting wind. Your life in the line shack has been reduced to a simple, brutal rhythm: wake, work, eat, sleep. You spend your days riding through the snow, your face chapped and raw from the cold, your eyes aching from the glare of the sun on the white landscape. You push cattle back from imaginary lines. You chop holes in the ice of frozen creeks so they can rink, and you search for the weak and dying. Your nights are spent in the suffocating silence of your tiny sod hovel, the only sound the howling of the wind and the crackle of your small fire. The loneliness is a physical thing, a constant, heavy presence. You have long since started talking to your horse, having detailed one-sided conversations about the weather, the cattle, and your past life. You've read the single, tattered dime novel you found in the shack so many times that the pages are falling apart. You know every word by heart. One day you are out riding your lawn and you see another rider in the distance. Your heart leaps. It's the first human being you've seen in over a month. As he gets closer, you recognize him. It's one of the other cowboys from the trail drive, a man named Henderson, who was assigned to the neighboring section. He looks as gaunt and weather-beaten as you feel. You meet in the middle of a vast, snow-covered valley, 2 tiny specks of life in an ocean of white. You don't say much at first, the habit of silence hard to break. You just share a cup of coffee from your saddle flask. But then the words start to come, tumbling out in a rush. You talk about nothing and everything: the health of the cattle, the depth of the snow, the latest rumor you heard before winter set in. It's the most meaningful conversation you've had in months. Henderson tells you a story that sends a chill down your spine, a chill that has nothing to do with the cold. He tells you about the man who had this section before him. The man had gone mad from the isolation, a victim of cabin fever. When the foreman came to check on him, he found the man had built a dozen friends out of straw and old clothes and was having a lively dinner party with them. He had to be tied up and taken back to the main ranch. This story highlights the real, and often tragic, fate of the aging cowboy. What happened to a man when he was too old, too injured, or too broken to ride the trail anymore? The Western myth has no answer for this. The cowboy hero always rides off into the sunset, forever young and strong. He never gets arthritis. He never gets arthritis. He never gets fired. The reality was grim. There was no pension, no retirement plan, no social safety net. A man's career as a cowboy was often brutally short. By the time he was 30, his body was often too worn out to continue the punishing work. He was left with no money, no property, and no skills other than those related to horses and cattle. Some former cowboys tried to become small-time ranchers themselves, but this required capital that few of them had. Others tried to settle down and become farmers, but many found they couldn't adapt to a sedentary life. They were men of motion, and farming felt like a prison. The more common path was to drift from one menial job to another: a stable hand, a bartender, a night watchman. They often ended up as town drunks, living off handouts, telling stories of their glory days to anyone who would listen. There's a historical debate about the end of the cowboy era. Some historians mark it with the terrible winter of 1887, which decimated the great herds. Others point to the invention and widespread use of barbed wire, which carved up the open range and made the long cattle drives obsolete. Joseph Glidden's invention in 1874 was initially mocked as the devil's rope, but it was a cheap and ruthlessly effective way to define property lines, and it fundamentally changed the West forever. The era of the free-roaming cowboy was over. A particularly sad, and often overlooked, fate was the county poor farm. Many counties in the West established these institutions to care for the indigent and the elderly. They were bleak, depressing places where men who had once been proud, independent cowboys lived out their final years in poverty and anonymity, their grand adventures reduced to a faded memory. You and Henderson finish your coffee and prepare to part ways. You promise to meet again in a few weeks. The brief meeting has been a lifeline, a reminder that you are not the only person in the world. As you watch him ride away, a lone figure shrinking against the vast white landscape, you think about your own future. You are still young, but you can feel the life grinding you down. You see the path ahead: a few more years of this, until your body gives out. And then what will you be? The man telling stories in a saloon, or the man eyeing alone in a county poor farm for the first time? You start to think not just about surviving the winter, but about escaping this life altogether. The dream of the West is long dead. Now, the only dream left is the dream of getting out. The first sign of spring is the sound of melting snow, a gentle, persistent dripping that signals the end of your long, frozen isolation. The grip of winter loosens, and the prairie begins to wake up. Patches of green appear on the brown hillsides, and the rivers, once frozen solid, begin to flow again. The foreman rides out to your line shack and tells you your work is done. It's time to head back to the main ranch. Returning to the ranch headquarters feels like returning to civilization. The sight of other people, the sound of multiple voices, the smell of a hot meal being cooked for more than one person, it's all a shock to your system. You have survived the winter, but the world you've returned to has changed. The invention that was once just a rumor, barbed wire, is now a reality. During the winter, the ranch owner has started fencing off huge sections of his property. The era of the open range is visibly, tangibly ending. You see long, ugly lines of wire stretching across the valleys, a stark, geometric pattern imposed upon the wild landscape. This is the Great Fence-Cutting War in its early stages. The history of the West is often told as a story of cowboys versus Indians, or settlers versus outlaws. But one of the most bitter and violent conflicts was between the big cattle barons, who wanted to fence the land, and the smaller, independent ranchers and cowboys, the nesters, who believed in the open range. Men would ride out at night, nippers, as they called the wire cutters, in hand, and cut miles of fence, only to have it rebuilt the next day. It was a desperate, losing battle against the forces of private property and progress. You learn that there will be no great cattle doctor north this year. The railroad has extended its lines further south. The new plan is to drive the cattle a much shorter distance to a new railhead. The epic 1,000-mile journey that defined your first year is now a thing of the past. The profession of the long-haul trail cowboy is becoming obsolete before your very eyes. O'Malley is still the trail boss, but he seems diminished, a man out of time. He gathers a small crew for the short drive, and you sign on. not with enthusiasm, but with a sense of weary familiarity. It's a job. The short drive is a shadow of its former self. It feels tame, predictable. The threat of the unknown is gone. The route is well established, the dangers minimized. It's no longer an exploration, it's a commute. You arrive at the new railhead town, and it too is different. It's more organized, more permanent. There are more families, more churches, and more laws. The wild, chaotic energy of the old cowtowns has been replaced by a kind of dull, commercial respectability. The town still wants the cowboys' money, but it does so in a more orderly fashion. You get your pay, which is less than last year, and you go through the familiar ritual: the bath, the shave, the new clothes. But this time, the spree feels different. It's less about wild release and more about a kind of quiet desperation. You and the other cowboys can all feel it. Your world is shrinking. The skills you've spent years acquiring, the ability to read a storm, to calm a nervous herd, to navigate by the stars, are becoming useless. You find yourself standing on a street corner, watching a family walk by. The man is a shopkeeper, his hands soft, his clothes clean. His wife is holding his arm, and their children are laughing. They are a part of this new West, a West of fences and property deeds and bank loans. They are building a future. You, on the other hand, are a relic of the past, and you are not even 20 years old. There's a great historical debate about the character of the cowboy. Was he a force of civilization, taming the wilderness and bringing order, or was he a fundamentally anti-social figure, a man who thrived in the absence of law and society, and who was inevitably pushed to the margins when civilization arrived? Looking at this family, you feel the truth of the latter. You don't belong in their world of neat houses and quiet evenings. This is where the story of the outlaw, the social bandit, finds its roots. Many historians argue that famous outlaws like Billy the Kid or Jesse James were not just common criminals. They were men who were displaced by the changing economic and social forces of the time. They were, in a sense, cowboys who refused to accept the end of the open range, who tried to fight against the fences and the railroads with a gun. Their violence was a desperate, doomed rebellion against the arrival of the modern world. You walk away from the main street and head towards the edge of town. You look out at the prairie, but it's no longer an empty canvas of possibility. You can see the faint, dark lines of the fences stretching out into the distance. The world is being carved up, measured, and sold. You think back to the dream that brought you here, the dream of freedom and wide open spaces. The dream was real for a brief, shining moment, but it was a historical anomaly, a fleeting window of time between the departure of the bison and the arrival of the barbed wire. You were lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to live in that window, but the window is closing. The cowboy as you knew him is a dying breed, and you have a choice to make. You can eye with him, clinging to a past that no longer exists, or you can adapt, swallow your pride, and find a place in this new fenced-in world. You stand there for a long time, the setting sun at your back, a man caught between a myth that is ending and a future that you never asked for. Years pass. The world you once knew has vanished completely. The great trail drives are now just stories that old men tell. The open range is a patchwork of fenced-in ranches and dusty farms. The West has been won, as they say, but you can't help but feel that something has been lost. You did not die with the myth. You adapted. You survived. You eventually saved enough money to buy your own small plot of land. You are no longer a cowboy, you are a rancher, a man tied to a single piece of earth. Your days are no longer spent in the saddle, roaming across a continent. They are spent mending your own fences, digging wells, and worrying about bank loans and the price of beef. The freedom of motion has been replaced by the heavy burden of ownership. Your body is a constant reminder of your past life. You walk with a permanent limp from a horse that fell on you years ago. Your hands are gnarled with arthritis, and they ache when the weather turns cold. You had scars you no longer remember getting. You are a living archive of the hardships of the trail. Sometimes you go into the nearby town, which is now a respectable little city with a brick courthouse and a school. You see the Wild West shows that pass through, like Buffalo Bill's famous extravaganza. You watch as actors, dressed in pristine, beaded buckskin, reenact this anodized, theatrical version of your life. You see them perform fake gunfights with blank cartridges and dried-in perfect, choreographed circles. The audience, full of people who have never known real hardship, gasps and cheers. They are in love with a fantasy, a glorious lie. You see young boys reading the same kind of dime novels that once lured you west, but the stories have grown even more fantastical. The cowboy is no longer just a hero, he is a kind of American knight, the chivalrous figure who rescues damsels and speaks a noble, stilted language. He is a clean, moral, and utterly fictional creation. This sanitization of the cowboy is a fascinating historical process. As the real, gritty West disappeared, America needed a new national myth. They needed a symbol of their country's rugged individualism, its strength, and its pioneering spirit. And so they took the poor, illiterate, overworked, and often desperate figure of the hired hand on horseback and transformed him into a legend. They scrubbed off the dirt, erased the disease and the despair, and polished him into the shining icon we know today. Historians call this the creation of the cowboy myth, a process that had more to do with the needs of the 20th century than the realities of the 19th. A strange and final irony is how the very tools of the cowboy's trade became symbols of this fantasy. The simple, functional work boots became ornate fashion statements. The sturdy denim pants became a worldwide symbol of youth and rebellion. The practical, wide-brimmed hat became the quintessential symbol of American masculinity. The tools of your hard labor have been turned into costumes for a play you never auditioned for. One evening, you are sitting on your porch, looking out at the sunset over your fenced-in land. Your grandson comes and sits with you. He has been reading one of those dime novels, and his eyes are wide with excitement. He asks you, "Grandpa, is it true? Did you really fight outlaws and ride in great stampedes?" You look at his young, hopeful face, and you are faced with a choice. You could tell him the truth. You could tell him about the crushing boredom, the bad food, the constant pain, the cheapness of life, and the profound loneliness. You could tell him that the biggest enemy you ever faced was a contaminated glass of water. You could shatter his dream, just as your dream was shattered all those years ago. Or you can give him the legend. You smile, the slow, weary smile. "Yes, son," you say, your voice soft. "It was a great adventure." And in that moment you understand. You understand why the myth is more powerful than the reality. The reality is a story of hardship and survival, but the myth is a story of hope, of freedom, of a world without fences. It's a dream of what America wanted to be, and perhaps what it still wishes it was. The real West is gone, buried under miles of barbed wire and railroad tracks. All that's left is the story, and you, in your old age, have become one of its keepers. You are no longer just a man who lived through it. You are now a part of the legend you never lived. The vast, empty spaces of the plains begin to fade from your mind, replaced by the soft, quiet darkness of your own room. The howl of the winter wind becomes the gentle hum of the fan, a soothing, rhythmic sound that carries you further away from the dust and the struggle. The hard, cold ground beneath your bedroll softens, transforming into the familiar comfort of your own bed, your own pillow. The journey is over. The hardships have receded, becoming distant. Silent echoes in the back of your mind. There are no more rivers to cross, no more storms to endure. There is only the calm, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet tide pulling you out into a sea of deep, peaceful slumber. The endless, rolling prairie of your imagination is now a soft, welcoming landscape of dreams, where the sky is always clear and the trail is always easy. You had survived. And now, all that is left to do is rest. Just rest. The end of the article. Good night.